Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and don't forget to leave a comment telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I never thought I would be the kind of person to post something like this online, but after all these years, the memory still clings to me like wet clothes in the dead of night. I used to laugh at people who swore they'd seen ghosts in cemeteries. I thought it was all superstition, campfire stories, or bored teenagers exaggerating their midnight dares. But that was before the graveyard job. That was before the thing I saw, the thing I still dream about, changed me forever. Back in 2012, I was 23, broke and desperate for money. I had just dropped out of community college and was crashing at my cousin's place in a small town in Ohio. The only work I could find was through this old man named Harvey, who ran a private cemetery on the outskirts of town. He said he needed someone to watch the grounds at night. I didn't ask too many questions. $11 an hour to sit in a shack and make sure nobody vandalized graves or stole flowers sounded fine by me. The place was called St. Augustine's Cemetery, though no church stood near it anymore. The land stretched for acres, full of cracked tombstones, crooked iron fences, and massive oak trees that bent in odd shapes like they were bowing over the dead. The first night felt uneventful. I sat in the guard shack with a thermos of coffee and my phone, checking the grounds every hour with a flashlight. It was quiet in that eerie way, like the silence had weight to it. Even the crickets seemed hesitant to chirp. By 3 a.m., I was nodding off when I heard something crunch outside the shack window. Leaves, twigs, like footsteps. I grabbed the flashlight and looked, expecting raccoons. But no one was there, just rows of pale stones disappearing into fog. That was the first time I heard it. A voice, low, distant, but clear. It sounded like a woman softly crying somewhere among the graves. My stomach dropped. My logical brain said it had to be the wind carrying noises from the road. Still, I walked out, heart hammering, light cutting across the mist. I followed the sound, weaving through the graves until I reached an old family mausoleum near the far edge of the property. The crying stopped. I shined the beam at the door, rusted shut, sealed with a heavy lock that hadn't been touched in decades. That night I didn't sleep. The second night, Harvey told me, "Don't wander too far out there. Just sit in the shack. You'll be fine." He said it like he knew something I didn't. But the voice came again, around 2:45 a.m., faint, like a lullaby carried on the wind. This time, it whispered my name. Daniel. I froze. Nobody should have known my name. I backed into the shack and locked the door, trembling like a child. I tried calling my cousin, but of course he didn't pick up. I sat there shaking until dawn broke and Harvey came around to check in. When I told him what happened, he just frowned and said, "Don't answer if you hear it again. Ever." By the fourth night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. The crying, the voice, the feeling of eyes watching me. It was eating at me. I grabbed the spare keys from Harvey's desk. He left them in the shack for emergencies, and decided I was going to check that mausoleum. Around 3 a.m., the voice returned louder than ever. "Daniel, help me." My hands shook as I walked across the foggy field. My flashlight flickered. The iron gate groaned as I pushed through. When I reached the mausoleum, I tried the key. To my surprise, the lock opened with a sharp click, like it had been waiting for me. The door creaked, releasing a burst of air that smelled like rot and damp earth. I stepped inside. There were coffins stacked in the walls, names carved into marble. Dust everywhere. But in the center of the floor was something that didn't belong, a wooden box, old but not as old as the rest. It looked like it had been shoved there recently. My beam caught scratches along the lid, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. I felt dizzy, like the air was spinning. The next thing I remember is running, sprinting across the field, dropping my flashlight, tripping over stones. I didn't stop until I burst into the shack, slammed the door, and hid in the corner until daylight. I told Harvey I quit. He didn't argue, just nodded slowly like he'd expected it. But here's the part that still haunts me. 2 weeks later, I read in the local paper about a group of teenagers who broke into St. Augustine's one night. They were found near the old mausoleum. All 4 of them dead. Their bodies weren't just dead. They were described as mummified, as if decades had passed. And in the grainy photo in the newspaper, I saw the mausoleum door wide open. The wooden box I had seen inside? Gone. The worst part is sometimes, late at night when I'm drifting to sleep, I hear that same soft voice whispering my name again. Daniel. And every time I swear I feel cold fingers brushing against my skin. I never went back to St. Augustine's. But the thing I let out that night, I don't think it ever left me. I used to work for a funeral home when I was in my late 20s. It wasn't the kind of job most people dream of, but it paid my bills, and I'd grown oddly comfortable around death. You learn to compartmentalize. It's just another part of life, right? That's what I thought until one particular night, a night that still crawls into my dreams like worms through dirt. The funeral home I worked for partnered with several cemeteries, meaning sometimes I had to help out with late burials or, in rare cases, relocations of old graves. It sounds unsettling, but you'd be surprised how routine it becomes. Back in 2016, I got a call from my boss, Mr. Hampton. He was an old, humorless man, the kind who carried the weight of every funeral on his shoulders. He said he needed me at Cedar Hill Cemetery after midnight. Family business, he muttered over the phone. Don't ask questions, just show up. So I did. Cedar Hill was one of those sprawling ancient graveyards that felt like stepping into another world. The headstones were weathered, angels missing wings, and mausoleums half swallowed by ivy. The air always smelled of moss and iron. When I got there, Mr. Hampton was already waiting by a single floodlight. Next to him stood 2 men I'd never seen before, both tall, dressed in black coats despite the summer heat. They didn't speak, didn't even acknowledge me. Hampton handed me a shovel and pointed toward a grave that had already been partially dug. The headstone read, Eleanor Price, 1892-1914. She has to be moved, Hampton said. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. I wanted to ask why. Usually there were permits, paperwork, reasons, but something in the way those men stared at me kept my mouth shut. So I dug. The dirt was heavy, thick with roots. Each shovelful felt harder than the last, though I couldn't tell if it was exhaustion or the way the silence pressed against me. Not even crickets dared to sing. After what felt like an eternity, my shovel hit something solid. The coffin. It was small, too small for comfort. Eleanor had been barely 20 when she died, but the size made me wonder if she had been even younger. Carefully, we lifted the decayed wood from the ground. The men in coats didn't help. They only watched, their eyes glinting strangely in the floodlight. When we set the coffin down, Hampton pulled out a crowbar. I thought he was going to move it intact to another site. But no. He pried the lid open. The smell that hit us was indescribable. It was the stench of damp soil and something older, fouler. I turned away, gagging, but curiosity pulled my eyes back. Inside wasn't what I expected. There wasn't a body. Instead, the coffin was lined with strange symbols carved into the wood. Symbols I didn't recognize, but they looked deliberate. Circles, spirals, intersecting lines. At the center was a bundle wrapped in rotting cloth tied with black string. The men in coats stepped forward for the first time, their hands twitching like they'd been waiting for this moment. Mr. Hampton whispered, "We shouldn't be doing this." But the men ignored him. They lifted the bundle out and began chanting under their breath in a language that made my skin crawl. I swear the air grew colder, the floodlight flickered, and for a moment, I felt as though the ground beneath us was shifting, like the earth itself was uneasy. I wanted to leave. I really did. But something held me there. Some morbid magnetism. One of the men cut the string around the bundle. The cloth fell away. It wasn't bones. It wasn't relics. It was hair. Thick, matted strands of black hair, tangled with bits of fingernail and teeth. The smell that burst out was rancid, like burned flesh. Suddenly, the ground around us trembled. I thought it was an earthquake at first, but then I noticed the graves. The soil on nearby plots was shifting, rising, as if something underneath was trying to claw its way out. "Close it back up," Hampton shouted, panicked. "For God's sake, close it." But it was too late. From the hole we dug, a hand shot up. Thin, pale, and covered in soil, the fingers twisted unnaturally, bending backward as they clawed for the air. I stumbled back, screaming. The men in coats didn't move, though. They were smiling. The hand was followed by another, then the crown of a head wet with dirt, hair hanging in clumps, and finally, a face. Not a skull, not decomposed, but a face that looked almost fresh, young, beautiful, but with eyes that were completely black. Eleanor Price. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, a low hum filled the air, vibrating through my bones. The men dropped to their knees, bowing, whispering in that awful language. Hampton grabbed my arm, yanking me toward the gates. "Run, now!" I didn't argue. We sprinted, not looking back, as the humming grew louder, echoing across the cemetery. When we reached the road, I turned for just a second. Under the flickering floodlight, I saw Eleanor standing beside the grave, her black eyes fixed on me. The men were gone. Only she remained, smiling faintly, her head tilted like she was memorizing my face. I quit the funeral home the next morning. Hampton never answered my calls again. A week later, I read his obituary in the local paper. Heart attack, they said. But here's the part that keeps me awake at night. Sometimes, when I'm driving past Cedar Hill, I see her, standing at the edge of the cemetery in that tattered white dress, hair hanging over her shoulders, eyes as black as the night sky. She always watches me, and I know one day she's going to step off that grass and follow me home. When I was 19, I worked at a gas station in a tiny town outside of Pittsburgh. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me just enough money to scrape by. My shift was usually overnight, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., which meant the station was dead quiet most of the time. The weird part wasn't the gas station itself, it was what stood across the road. Directly opposite the gas station, behind a row of leaning iron fences and a crumbling brick wall, was Greenwood Cemetery. It stretched out for acres, and from the front counter I could see rows of crooked gravestones fading into the mist. Nobody visited at night, of course, except, sometimes I swear, I saw figures moving among the stones, shadows pacing slowly like they were waiting for something. At first I told myself I was imagining it. Long hours, caffeine overload, boredom, it all messes with your head. But one night around 2 a.m. I noticed something that made my skin crawl. A man standing perfectly still inside the cemetery, right across from the glass storefront. He wasn't moving, wasn't visiting a grave, just standing, facing the gas station. His outline was pale in the fog, his head tilted slightly to the side like he was studying me. I froze behind the counter. The store was empty. It felt like he could see me through the glass, though I knew it was impossible from that distance. After a few minutes, I turned to check the security monitor, and when I looked back, he was gone. That was the start of it. For the next week, I kept seeing the man in the cemetery. Sometimes closer to the fence, sometimes farther away, but always watching. He never moved, never spoke, never even blinked. My coworker Nate thought I was losing it. "Dude, you need more sleep," he laughed. But I could tell, deep down, he didn't want to look out the window himself. Then came the night I'll never forget. It was late October, the kind of cold that stings your lungs. The wind rattled the station's doors, and I was huddled by the heater with a cup of stale coffee. That's when I noticed movement again, not just one figure this time, several. A group of them drifting slowly between the tombstones. Men, women, even what looked like a child. Their faces were pale, glowing faintly, their movements unnaturally slow, as though they weren't walking but gliding. My chest tightened. I couldn't look away. And then, all at once, they stopped. Every one of them turned toward me, their heads snapping in unison, like puppets on strings. My heart nearly stopped. Their mouths opened, but instead of sound, a wave of silence hit me. The night went still. No wind, no hum of the refrigerators, nothing. Just silence pressing against my skull until my ears rang. That's when the phone behind the counter rang. I jumped, nearly spilling my coffee. It was the landline we almost never used, reserved for emergencies. I picked it up with shaking hands. A voice whispered, "Why are you watching us?" I slammed the phone down, gasping for air. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I wanted to run out the back door, drive anywhere else, but my legs felt like stone. When I finally glanced back at the cemetery, the figures were gone. I didn't tell Nate about the call. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? But things got worse. Every shift, the silence came back. Not all at once, but creeping, like the world itself was being turned down. The figures appeared more often, standing at the fence now, close enough that I could see their hollow eyes, their gray skin stretched too thin. They were waiting, watching. One night, when the silence hit, the lights in the gas station flickered. I grabbed the flashlight under the counter, panic rising in my chest. That's when I heard the sound of footsteps. Inside the store. Slow, deliberate, heavy. "Hello?" I croaked, shining the flashlight down the aisles. Nothing. But the footsteps grew louder, closer, circling me like something unseen was stalking just beyond the beam. Then, the phone rang again. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to answer. The same voice whispered, "Turn around." Against everything screaming inside me, I turned. And I saw him, the man who had first appeared across the street. He was inside the gas station now, standing by the glass door, his pale face grinning. His eyes were pits of black, his teeth too many for his mouth. He pressed his hand against the glass, and frost spread across it instantly. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and when I blinked, he was gone. Just gone. I quit the gas station the next morning. I didn't even bother collecting my last paycheck. I packed a bag and moved 3 towns over, thinking distance would help. For a while, it did, until last year. I was driving home late from a friend's place, half asleep on the highway, when I stopped at a random gas station for coffee. I didn't think much of it at first. The place looked the same as any other, fluorescent lights, buzzing refrigerators. But when I walked to the counter, I froze. Through the glass windows across the empty lot, I saw it. A cemetery. And standing among the graves was the same man, pale and grinning, his head tilted just so. He lifted his hand slowly, pointing directly at me. And I swear to God, the phone behind the counter started ringing. I've debated for years whether to tell this story. Not because I'm afraid people will call me crazy. I stopped caring about that long ago. But because I worry that by telling it, I'll somehow make it stronger. Like speaking its name will invite it back into my life. But I can't keep it bottled anymore. Maybe writing it down will lift the weight. When I was a kid, my grandparents lived in a small Pennsylvania town. They owned an old house that backed right up against a graveyard. Literally, their backyard ended at a rusted chain-link fence, and just beyond it stretched rows of crooked stones, some dating back to the 1700s. As a child, I was terrified of that cemetery. The fog, the way the trees seemed to reach over the graves, the eerie silence at night. It all seemed wrong. But my grandfather always said, "The dead can't hurt you. It's the living you need to fear." I believed him, until the night I learned otherwise. It was the summer of 2004 when I was 12. My parents had dropped me off for a weekend while they went on a trip. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The air was too still, and the cicadas that usually screamed outside were oddly quiet. Around midnight, I got up to get water and glanced out the back window. That's when I saw him. A man standing in the graveyard, only a few feet from the fence. He was tall, dressed in black, with a pale face that seemed to glow in the moonlight. He wasn't moving. He was just watching the house. I ducked under the window, heart slamming in my chest. After what felt like forever, I peeked again. He was gone. The next morning I told my grandparents. My grandfather frowned but said nothing. My grandmother, though, looked pale. She whispered something to him in German, something I didn't understand. That day, they didn't let me go outside. That night, I saw him again. Same spot, same stillness, same head tilted slightly as if memorizing the shape of the house. This time, I ran to my grandfather's room and begged him to look. He sighed, grabbed his flashlight, and took me outside. But when we reached the fence, the man was gone. "See?" my grandfather said, his voice stern. "Nothing but your imagination?" But I knew he was lying. His hand was shaking as he held the flashlight. The third night was the worst. I woke up to tapping, slow, deliberate tapping against the bedroom window. My stomach dropped. I was on the second floor. No tree branches reached that high. I forced myself to look. And there he was. The same man, his pale face pressed against the glass, his lips curved into a grin. His eyes were pure black, endless. He lifted his hand and tapped again, his fingernails screeching against the pane. I screamed. By the time my grandparents rushed in, the window was empty. My grandfather looked furious, but not at me, at something else, something he refused to explain. That night, he made me sleep in their room, and he sat awake in a chair until dawn, clutching something in his pocket. Years passed, and I tried to bury that memory, but I never stayed overnight at their house again. When I was 23, my grandfather died. I went back for the funeral. It was held in the same graveyard behind their house. As we lowered the coffin into the earth, I felt that same icy dread crawling up my spine. And when I glanced across the rows of stones, my blood froze. He was there. The same man, unchanged, watching from a distance, pale face, black eyes, tilted head, like he hadn't aged a day. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Nobody else seemed to notice. After the service, I asked my grandmother about him. She grew pale, shook her head, and whispered, "Don't look at him. Don't acknowledge him. Promise me." I pressed her, desperate. Finally, she broke down. She told me our family carried a curse, that long ago one of our ancestors, her great-grandfather, had stolen something sacred from a grave, some kind of burial charm meant to keep a restless soul bound. Ever since, a watcher had followed the family, always appearing near graveyards, always staring, waiting for the right moment. "Don't speak to him," she said. "If you do, he'll know you see him, and then he'll follow you everywhere." I wish I had listened. A year later, drunk and reckless, I visited that cemetery alone at night. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove it was all superstition. Maybe I wanted answers. Whatever the reason, I stood among the stones, calling out into the fog. And he appeared, closer this time, only a few feet away. His smile stretched wider, too many teeth for a human mouth. My legs shook, but I forced the words out. "What do you want?" For the first time, he spoke. His voice was like wind through dry leaves, low and rasping. "Your grave." The world tilted, my vision blurred, and then he was gone. Since that night, he's never left me. No matter where I move, no matter how far I go, I see him. Sometimes outside my apartment window, sometimes across the street, sometimes reflected in mirrors, always watching, always waiting. And here's the part that makes me wonder if writing this is a mistake. Last night, I woke to a sound in my apartment, a slow, deliberate tapping at the bedroom window. My heart froze. I knew it was him. When I gathered the courage to look, the glass was empty. But this morning, when I checked my phone, there was a new photo in my gallery. One I didn't take. It was of me, asleep in my bed, and in the corner of the photo, standing by the window, was the watcher, smiling. What if the dead never stopped talking, just waiting for someone to listen? That was the question carved into the rotten wooden sign at the entrance of Gravewood Cemetery, a forgotten patch of land buried deep within the pine woods of northern Maine. No one remembered who put that sign there, or why the place had been closed off for nearly 40 years. But on a storm-bitten night in October, Evan Cole, a 31-year-old journalist chasing his next big story, found himself standing before that sign, rain sliding down his face, flashlight trembling in his hand. He didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in stories, especially ones that paid rent. The locals in the nearby town of Gray Hill spoke of Gravewood in half-whispers, like a place that could overhear them. They said the ground moved there, that sometimes if you pressed your ear to the dirt, you could hear the voices of people who were never found. Evan had dismissed it as folklore, until he saw the file. A sheriff's folder marked Gravewood Disappearances, 1983-1991. Inside, 19 missing persons, all vanished within a mile radius of the cemetery. And one photo that made his stomach twist, a picture of his mother, dated October 27, 1991. He'd never known much about her death. His father told him she died in a car crash. But the sheriff's note said, "Body never recovered." The rain turned to a slow drizzle as Evan stepped through the rusted iron gates. They moaned open like a warning sigh. Gravewood wasn't just a cemetery. It was a graveyard swallowed by the forest. The tombstones were crooked and half-buried, the soil thick and dark as ink. The names were eaten by moss. The air carried the metallic scent of old rain and something else, like earth that had been disturbed too recently. His flashlight beam caught movement. A figure, no, a shadow, glided behind one of the larger monuments. "Hey, who's there?" No response, only the sound of dripping rain and the distant rumble of thunder. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and moved closer. The grave it illuminated was massive, an ancient stone crypt carved with Latin words, almost impossible to read under centuries of moss. But one line stood out clearly. "Here the listeners rest." He crouched, brushing dirt away from the base, revealing a small iron door locked with a chain. His pulse quickened. Maybe the crypt had a hidden entrance, something worth photographing. He pulled a small crowbar from his backpack and wedged it under the lock. One sharp crack later, the chain fell loose. The door creaked open an inch, and a wave of air colder than ice rushed out, carrying a sound that didn't belong in this world. A whisper. Soft, urgent, layered, like hundreds of people speaking at once, their words tangled and desperate. Evan froze. He stepped back, shining his light inside the darkness of the crypt. It revealed stairs, spiraling down into the earth. Every rational part of him screamed to leave, but the journalist in him whispered, "If your mother disappeared here, this is where the truth is buried." He took a deep breath, switched his flashlight to full power, and descended. The air thickened as he went lower. The smell of wet stone and decay clung to his throat. When he finally reached the bottom, his beam revealed a chamber lined with coffins. Not wood, but iron. Each one engraved with names scratched out so violently they were unreadable. In the center stood a single open coffin, and beside it an old phonograph. The needle arm hovered over a spinning record, though no one was near it. It was playing something faint. A woman's voice, crackling through static. They told us to listen, but the ground never stopped talking. Evan's flashlight flickered. He stepped closer, heart pounding. The voice continued. And now, it wants new listeners. He reached toward the record player, and the coffin beside it shuddered. Dust exploded from its seams as the lid trembled, lifting half an inch. Something was inside, moving. Evan stumbled backward, slamming into another coffin. The phonograph's voice warped, rising into a shriek of static. Then, silence. A heavy click echoed behind him. The iron door at the top of the stairs had closed on its own. He sprinted to the staircase, slamming his shoulder against the door. It didn't budge. His flashlight went out. He was swallowed by darkness. For several seconds he heard nothing, then faint scratching. It came from all around him, from the walls, from the coffins. Then, a whisper, right by his ear. "Evan." He froze. That voice, soft, trembling. He knew it. It was his mother's. "You shouldn't have come here." He spun around wildly, lightless, trembling. "Mom? Where are you?" "You can't save me," she whispered. "You can only replace me." The ground beneath him trembled. He stumbled back, and his foot sank into soft earth. The floor was collapsing. With a roar of cracking stone, the chamber gave way. Evan screamed as the ground swallowed him whole, pulling him into the black pit below. The last thing he heard before he blacked out was the whispering chorus, hundreds of voices, all merging into one haunting phrase. "Welcome to Graveward." Darkness didn't just surround Evan, it consumed him. He wasn't falling through air, but through something thicker, heavier, like water mixed with soil. It clung to his skin and filled his mouth with the taste of rust and decay. His scream was swallowed whole by the earth. Then, suddenly, he hit something hard. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs. He lay still for a moment, trying to understand where he was, his mind spinning between panic and disbelief. When he finally reached for his flashlight, his fingers brushed mud and bone. He switched it on. The beam stuttered weakly, struggling against the gloom. What it revealed made his stomach twist. He was lying on a floor made of skulls, hundreds of them fused together with hardened mud and roots, their hollow eyes staring in every direction. Between them, long, thin roots writhed like veins pulsing beneath the surface, as if the entire place were alive. His light flickered again, and for a second he swore the skulls were breathing. He staggered to his feet, every sound echoing like it was swallowed and repeated somewhere deeper below. His flashlight cut across the vast underground chamber. Its walls were carved with human shapes, outlines pressed into the rock as though bodies had been trapped there long ago, their faces frozen mid-scream. A faint dripping echoed. Water, or something thicker, dripped down from the ceiling, leaving black trails across the wall carvings. And then he noticed something else. Footprints, fresh ones, leading away from where he'd landed into a narrow tunnel that curved out of sight. His breath caught. "Someone's here," he whispered to himself, though the word someone felt dangerously hopeful. He followed the prints. The tunnel walls closed in tighter the further he went, forcing him to crouch. The air grew colder, and that whispering sound returned, not around him but through the walls like the stone itself carried voices. "Listen, listen, listen." The voices weren't random. They spoke in rhythm, like a chant. The further he went, the louder it grew until he reached a narrow archway glowing faintly red. Beyond it lay a massive chamber, dimly lit by hundreds of candles stuck into the cracks of stone. The walls were covered with strange markings, circles, lines, and names written in ash, and in the center of the room stood a woman, barefoot, wearing a tattered hospital gown, her long black hair veiling her face. Evan froze. The woman was humming, a slow, broken lullaby that echoed across the chamber. Her hands trembled as she traced her fingers across the names on the wall, whispering each one like a prayer. Evan took a cautious step forward. "Hey, are you okay?" The woman stopped humming. Her head tilted slightly, just enough for him to see part of her face through the hair. Pale skin, lips cracked and dry, eyes glassy and wet like she'd been crying for years. "You shouldn't speak down here," she said softly. Her voice shook. "They hear everything." "Who's they?" Evan asked. She looked toward the wall and pressed a finger to her lips. "The ones buried beneath us. The ones who never stopped listening." He felt a chill climb his spine. What is this place? This is the chamber of the unheard, she whispered, where those who listen too long are kept. She turned to face him fully now. Evan gasped. He recognized her face. Not from memory, but from a photograph. The missing persons file. Her name was Lydia Merrick, vanished from Gray Hill in 1986. You're alive, Evan breathed. Her eyes darted to the ground. No, not anymore. Before he could question her, a deep rumbling groan echoed through the tunnels. The candles flickered violently. The walls trembled. Lydia's expression darkened with fear. They're waking, she whispered. You shouldn't have come here. What's waking? The listeners. The whispering around them turned into a chorus. It wasn't human anymore. It came from below, layered with growls, breaths, and something that sounded like bones grinding together. Evan's flashlight swung toward the far end of the chamber, where the ground bulged upward as if something enormous was pushing from underneath. Lydia grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. Run! But before they could move, the earth cracked open. A hand, pale, veined, and impossibly long, burst through the soil, followed by another. The creature that dragged itself out was not a corpse, but not alive either. Its body was shaped like a man, yet its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, packed with soil and teeth that looked carved from stone. The sockets where eyes should have been dripped thick black fluid. It moved toward them, twitching violently with every step, as if its limbs weren't used to motion. Evan backed up, heart racing. What the hell is that? Lydia whispered shakily. They are the ones who heard too much. The ground remembers every scream, every secret. The creature turned its head sharply, facing them despite its lack of eyes. Then, in a low, rasping voice, it spoke Evan's name. Evan. His blood froze. It wasn't random. It said his name in his mother's voice. Lydia pulled him by the arm, dragging him through a narrow passageway leading away from the chamber. The whispering followed them, echoing louder with every step. Evan's flashlight flickered wildly, catching glimpses of old carvings on the walls, faces, names, dates, all etched in by human hands. Finally, they burst into another chamber, smaller, filled with water up to their knees. Lydia stopped, panting, her voice trembling. This tunnel connects to the catacombs. If we can find the exit before they do, maybe. A sound cut her off. A single bell rang from somewhere deep within the tunnels. Evan frowned. A bell? Lydia's expression turned to pure horror. That's not a bell. That's a summon. Before Evan could ask what she meant, dozens of whispers rose in unison, forming a chant that made the water ripple. The ground beneath their feet began to breathe again. Lydia grabbed his face with both hands. Listen to me. Once they've called your name, it's too late unless you give them another name instead. What do you mean? Trade your voice, trade your name, or they'll take it. Evan shook his head in disbelief. You're insane. But then from behind him came that same voice again, his mother's. Evan, please, you promised you'd find me. He turned. The creature from before was crawling through the tunnel, half submerged, its face inches from the water. And now, it had her face, his mother's, smiling, crying, and whispering his name. The candles in Lydia's hands blew out. Everything went black except for the faint glow of the creature's eyes, pale, ghostly, and filled with tears. Come home, Evan. He screamed as the creature lunged forward, water exploding upward like black rain. The creature's shriek rattled the stone walls as it lunged through the floodwater. Evan stumbled backward, slashing at the air with his flashlight, the beam cutting through waves of darkness. Lydia screamed, her voice drowned beneath the sound of rushing water and 1,000 overlapping whispers. The thing's face twisted, his mother's eyes wide with grief, its jaw stretching far too wide as soil spilled from its throat. It wasn't her. It was a mockery, a puppet of something deeper. Evan grabbed Lydia's wrist. Run! They sprinted through the narrow tunnel, the walls pressing close as if the earth itself were trying to seal them in. The whispering rose higher, surrounding them from every direction. Some voices pleading, others laughing. Evan's chest burned as he ran, the air thick with rot and iron. Behind them, the creature's hands scraped the walls, its claws leaving long grooves in the rock. And beneath its inhuman growl, it kept repeating the same phrase over and over. Trade your name, trade your name. They burst into another chamber, this one wider, the ceiling lost in darkness. Candles floated on the surface of still water, their reflections like eyes watching from below. In the center stood a stone archway, half collapsed, carved with symbols identical to those on the crypt above. Lydia yanked him behind one of the pillars. It won't stop until it takes something from you, she whispered, voice trembling. Your name, your breath, your sound. Evan caught his breath. What the hell does that even mean? What are these things? Her eyes darted toward the archway. They were people once, listeners, like me. He frowned. Like you? She nodded slowly. I came down here years ago with others. We thought the voices were spirits, lost souls calling for help. We wanted to record them, to prove life after death. Her voice cracked. But the ground doesn't hold spirits, it feeds on them. The candles flickered, as if the chamber itself was reacting to her words. Evan whispered, Feeds on them? Lydia's eyes met his. Every voice you hear down here is someone who never left. A distant rumble rolled through the tunnels, followed by a low groan like 1,000 people sighing in pain. The water around them rippled. They're close, Lydia said. We can't stay here. She pointed toward a staircase carved into the far wall, leading upward into another corridor. They waded through the water and began climbing. Every step echoed, the sound bouncing down into the chamber below like footsteps of ghosts following them. At the top, they emerged into a long hallway filled with old stone coffins. Some were shattered, others sealed tight. The names etched into them were familiar, too familiar. Evan froze. He recognized one. Cole, Sarah, 1991. His mother's coffin. He dropped to his knees, fingers trembling as he brushed the dust from the nameplate. His throat went dry. This can't be real. My father said that she died in a crash? Lydia finished softly. No, she was taken. Evan's mind reeled. Taken by who? The same thing that's taking you now. Before he could respond, a faint metallic clang echoed from the far end of the corridor. Then another. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy, approached. Lydia grabbed his arm. Hide! They ducked behind one of the broken coffins as the sound grew louder. Through the crack, Evan saw a figure emerge from the shadows. A man wearing a decayed undertaker's coat, his face hidden behind a cracked porcelain mask. Chains hung from his shoulders, dragging along the ground with every step. In his hand, he carried a lantern glowing with sickly green light. Inside it, shadows swirled like trapped smoke. The man stopped in front of one coffin and spoke softly, his voice low and rasped with age. Restless again. Always restless. He reached into the coffin and poured the lantern's light into it. The shadows seeped into the corpse, and for a brief moment Evan saw it move. The body twitching, whispering soundlessly. The man sighed. Sleep, listener. Your name is not yet called. Evan's stomach turned. He wasn't a gravekeeper. He was a warden, guarding the things buried here. As the man moved closer to their hiding spot, Lydia clamped a hand over Evan's mouth. The lantern's glow slid across the stone, then across their faces. The masked man stopped. He tilted his head, sniffing the air. Fresh sound, he murmured. Someone still breathing. Evan's heart hammered so loudly he was sure it would give them away. The man crouched, the lantern dangling inches from the ground, the green light creeping toward them. Lydia whispered, barely audible. Don't speak. Don't even think your name. The man reached over the coffin, fingers brushing the edge. And then from somewhere deeper in the tunnels, the bell rang again. He paused, straightened, and turned toward the sound. "Another called," he said, almost with reverence. Then he walked away, his chains dragging into the darkness. Only when the sound faded did Lydia release her hand from Evan's mouth. Evan whispered, "Who was that?" "The warden," she said. "He listens for the ones who wake too soon. He keeps them fed." "Fed with what?" Her eyes met his. "Names." They moved deeper into the tunnel, the air growing colder. The whispering followed them like an echo of their own breath. The walls began to change, no longer stone but flesh-like, pulsing faintly, as if the earth itself had veins. Lydia stopped abruptly and turned to him. "You need to understand. Your mother wasn't killed by them. She became one of them. She tried to take their place." Evan blinked. "What do you mean?" "She offered her name to save someone else." Lydia's voice broke. "That's why they took her. She became one of the first listeners, the ones buried beneath the chamber." The realization hit him like a wave of cold air. His mother hadn't been a victim. She'd been a sacrifice. But before he could say another word, the wall beside them cracked open. A pale hand reached through, grasping Lydia's throat. She screamed, clawing at the fingers as they pulled her backward. Evan lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "Hold on." Her eyes met his, wide with terror. "It's calling your name. Don't answer it." "What?" "Whatever you do, don't—" Her sentence was cut off as the wall swallowed her completely, sealing shut behind her. Evan was left alone, the whispering now deafening, all of it repeating one word in unison. "Evan. Evan. Evan Cole." He clamped his hands over his ears and screamed, "Stop!" The voices fell silent. Then one final whisper slithered through the air, soft, intimate, familiar. "You were never meant to leave, my son." The voice was his mother's, and it was coming from the coffin behind him. He turned slowly. The coffin's lid was shifting, dust falling from its edges. A thin, pale hand emerged, followed by a face, his mother's, perfectly preserved, her eyes glassy and full of sorrow. "Mom," he whispered, trembling. She smiled faintly. "You finally heard me." He stumbled backward as she crawled from the coffin, her gown soaked in black mud, her lips parting in a slow, unnatural grin. "The ground remembers, Evan," she said softly. "Now it's your turn to listen." The floor began to tremble. Cracks split open beneath his feet, whispering voices flooding from the fissures like steam. The walls pulsed. The whispering grew into screams. And then, everything went black. Evan awoke to the sound of chains dragging across stone. For a few seconds he couldn't move. His limbs were stiff, his breath shallow, his ears ringing with the echoes of whispers that no longer seemed to come from outside but from inside his skull. When he tried to sit up, pain shot through his chest. His head throbbed as if something heavy had pressed against it all night. The air was damp, thick with the smell of earth and rust. The faint green glow illuminated the chamber he was in. A crypt-like room, circular, with walls covered in parchment-like skin stretched across the stone. Symbols and names were etched into it, some freshly carved, others faded and scarred over. He looked down and realized he was lying on a stone slab surrounded by lit candles. His wrists were wrapped in thin iron bands, inscribed with small letters that shimmered faintly in the candlelight. A figure moved across the room, the dragging of chains following behind. Evan's pulse quickened. "Who's there?" The figure turned. The porcelain mask gleamed under the candlelight. The warden, the same undertaker-like figure from before. He carried the same lantern, its glass glowing with that unearthly green hue, shadows swirling inside like trapped souls. The warden's voice was deep, measured, and oddly calm. "You wake beneath the graveward, where all names find their rest." Evan tried to sit up, but the pain forced him back down. "Where's my mother? What did you do to her?" The warden tilted his head slowly, the mask creaking faintly. Your mother is where all listeners go, between silence and the soil. What the hell does that mean? It means she gave her name to the ground, and the ground never forgets what it owns. Evan gritted his teeth, trying to fight the fear clawing up his throat. You keep saying, names. Why? What do they matter? The warden walked closer, the lantern's light crawling up the walls. Names are sound given shape. To speak a name is to bind a soul. Down here, the ground remembers every name it's ever been fed. He set the lantern beside Evan. Inside it, Evan saw faces, blurred, translucent, drifting like smoke, each one silently screaming. The warden continued. Those who listen too closely lose their names to the earth. They become whispers, echoes. But those who offer another name in place of their own, he leaned forward, voice lowering. They live. Evan's eyes widened. You're saying I can survive this? Perhaps, the warden said, his tone almost gentle. But the ground demands balance. One name for another. If you would leave this place, you must trade yours for someone else's. Evan shook his head. I'm not killing anyone. The warden chuckled softly, a hollow sound echoing from beneath the mask. Killing? No. The earth does that part for you. You need only speak the name aloud, and the ground will claim it. Evan's heart pounded. He stared into the lantern, the faces shifting and swirling, one of them suddenly resembling his own mother. She looked up at him, her mouth moving without sound, eyes pleading. The warden stood tall, his shadow stretching long across the wall. Your mother gave hers to protect you. That is why the earth never took you as a child. Evan froze. What? The warden nodded slowly. She offered her voice, her name, her life, so that yours would be untouched. But protection does not last forever. When the name is called again, it must be answered. He reached down and touched the iron band around Evan's wrist. The ground has called you, Evan Cole. It will not stop until it is fed again. The chains clinked softly as the warden turned toward a nearby door, an arched gate carved into bone and wood. You will have until the next bell, he said. When it tolls, the ground will rise for its due. Trade your name, or be buried among the unheard. And with that, he stepped through the doorway, his lantern's light vanishing like a retreating ghost. The door slammed shut, plunging Evan into near darkness. The whispers started again, soft at first, like wind through dead leaves. Then louder, closer. Trade your name. Give, or be taken. He gritted his teeth, trying to block them out. But they were everywhere, inside the walls, under the floor, behind his eyes. He stumbled off the slab, the iron cuffs breaking loose with a metallic crack. He needed to get out. He stumbled toward the door and pushed. It didn't move. He tried again, harder. Nothing. The air grew colder. The candles around the room began to extinguish one by one, as if unseen fingers were snuffing them out. And then, from the shadows, came a faint light. White, flickering. Lydia. She stood in the doorway opposite him, drenched in mud, her gown torn, her face pale and streaked with tears. Her eyes looked hollow, distant. Lydia, he gasped. She didn't answer at first, just stepped closer, her expression unreadable. You shouldn't still be here, she said finally. Once the warden marks you, there's no leaving. He said I can trade my name, give another instead. Lydia's voice cracked. That's what they tell you. But every trade just feeds the ground more. That's how it spreads. He frowned. Spreads? She nodded, trembling. Graveward isn't just a place. It's a hunger. Every time someone trades a name, it grows stronger. Every whisper above ground, every rumor of ghosts. It's all the ground reaching out. Evan felt a chill run through his veins. Then why help me? Lydia's lips trembled. Because I remember what it's like to have a name. The chamber quaked suddenly, dust raining from the ceiling. A low rumble rolled through the ground like thunder buried beneath stone. Lydia looked around frantically. It's waking again, the bell's about to ring. She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a small shard of glass, etched with faint symbols. If you want to live, don't trade your name. Bury it. Hide it where it can't hear you. What? Say it backwards. Speak it once, then cover it in soil. That's the only way to blind the ground's call. Evan's mind raced. Will that really work? Her eyes met his, desperate and uncertain. It's the only thing that ever has. The rumbling grew louder. The air shimmered with unseen movement. From somewhere far above, the bell began to toll. 1, 2, 3. The walls rippled and the whispers turned into screams. Faces began to form in the stone. Men, women, children, all mouthing words in unison. Evan Cole? Lydia shoved him toward the slab. Do it now. Say it backwards. Evan hesitated, panic flooding his chest. He knelt and pressed his hands to the cold earth. I don't even know if... The voices roared, the ground splitting open beneath his knees. Hands, thin, bony, clawing, reached up from below, grasping at his legs. Do it, Lydia screamed. Evan squeezed his eyes shut and whispered, Navy lock, Navy lock. The air went still. The whispers stopped. The ground froze in place, the hands turning to stone around his ankles before crumbling into dust. He opened his eyes. Lydia stared at him in disbelief. It worked, she whispered. You buried your name. Evan stood shakily, heart pounding. Now what? Before she could answer, a deep, cold voice filled the chamber, coming from everywhere at once. You can bury your name, Evan Cole, but you cannot bury your blood. The candles went out, and from the far end of the room, the warden's lantern flickered to life again, its glow now blood red. The air that night hung like a shroud, damp, heavy, and filled with the smell of earth that had been disturbed too many times. The wind whispered low moans through the hollow gaps in the gravestones, almost as if the ground itself was breathing. Emily and Caleb had barely spoken since the door in the crypt slammed shut behind them. Their flashlights flickered in nervous synchrony, beams cutting through the thick darkness that now seemed alive. Moving, shifting, watching. Caleb pressed his ear against the stone door, his breath quick and shallow. It's sealed, he muttered. From the outside. He turned to Emily, eyes wide with disbelief. Someone locked us in. Emily's trembling voice broke through the silence. Who? There's no one up there. We saw... But she couldn't finish, because deep beneath their feet, a low grinding sound began, like ancient gears turning or stone dragging against stone. Then came the sound that made both of them freeze, and footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing in the tunnels below. Caleb raised his flashlight, sweeping the beam across the crypt walls. The stone slabs were etched with strange markings, spirals, inverted crosses, and words that looked Latin but didn't quite make sense. These aren't just graves, he whispered. They're seals. Emily's light caught something, a carving of a symbol she had seen before. It was the same sigil from the cracked gravestone outside, the one that had her name scratched beneath it. Only this time, there were 3 names under the symbol: Emily Holloway, Caleb Rivers, and one more. Reverend James Keaton. Caleb stared at it, his blood running cold. That's the priest who built this church, he said quietly. He vanished. Everyone thought he disappeared after the fire. Emily ran her fingers over the stone. He didn't vanish, she whispered. He was buried here, with his victims. Then came another sound, faint but unmistakable. Whispering. It came from beyond the walls, like dozens of voices murmuring in unison. They couldn't make out words, but the tone carried something malicious, as though they were chanting. Suddenly, Caleb's flashlight sputtered out. The darkness swallowed him whole. Emily screamed his name, but her voice bounced back distorted, as if the walls were warping her sound. She could hear him moving. Heavy footsteps, quick, panicked. Then silence. "Caleb," she whispered. No answer. Only the whispers. Closer now. She tried her phone, but there was no signal. Only static. Yet within that static, she swore she heard a voice, faint and broken like a transmission through time. "Don't open the stone door. It's not meant to be opened again." Her heart pounded in her ears. She spun around, pointing her flashlight toward the stairs leading down. The stone steps twisted into darkness. At the base, she thought she saw movement, a shape, slouched, crawling slowly upward. The beam trembled in her hand as the figure emerged into view. It was Caleb, but his face was pale, his lips moving without sound, eyes glazed with terror. "Run," he mouthed. Before Emily could respond, something dragged him backward into the dark with inhuman force. His scream was swallowed by the earth. Emily stumbled back against the wall, gasping, tears streaming down her face. Her mind screamed to run, but her body refused to move. Then she heard something breathing right behind her. She turned and saw the figure of a man standing at the far end of the crypt. He was dressed in a tattered priest's robe, his face hidden beneath a hood. In one hand, he held an ancient lantern that glowed with a sickly, greenish flame. "Who are you?" Emily cried, her voice breaking. The figure lifted his head slowly. His skin was pale and cracked, his eyes black voids. When he spoke, his voice sounded like 1,000 whispers layered over each other. "I am the keeper of the bound," he said, "and you have broken the seal." Emily backed away, her flashlight shaking. "I didn't mean to. I just came to see the grave that bears your name," he interrupted, taking a step forward. "You were summoned, Emily Holloway, chosen by the soil of this cursed ground." She shook her head violently. "No, I was just curious. I wanted to understand what happened here." He smiled, a hollow, corpse-like stretch of lips. "Then you shall understand. Everything." With a sudden motion, he raised his lantern high, and the crypt walls began to move. Stone slabs shifted aside, revealing alcoves filled with desiccated corpses, their empty eyes glimmering faintly in the lantern light. One by one, they began to stir. Emily screamed and ran for the staircase, but the stone door above remained sealed. The whispers grew louder, morphing into anguished wails. She could feel hands brushing against her ankles, cold and bony, pulling at her as if the dead wanted her among them. "Please, somebody help me," she cried. And then, silence. The hands retreated. The wailing stopped. The only sound was the flicker of the lantern. When she turned around, the priest was gone. Only his lantern remained on the floor, its strange green flame still burning. Against all sense, she picked it up. Immediately, a vision struck her. A flash of fire and screams. The old church above ground engulfed in flames, the priest standing at the altar chanting as the roof caved in, and beneath it all, a pit. A bottomless pit filled with moving shadows, reaching upward as the earth consumed them. She dropped the lantern, gasping. What was that?" The green flame didn't go out. Instead, it began to spread across the stone floor like liquid light, tracing ancient patterns and symbols, a ritual circle. In the center of that circle, the stone slab with the names began to crack open. A faint hand, skeletal, wrapped in rotting cloth, emerged, gripping the edge. Emily screamed as the slab split in half and something began to climb out. Not quite human, not quite spirit. Its body shimmered between flesh and dust, its eyes hollow voids. And then she realized the horrible truth. The third name, Reverend James Keaton, had been scratched over, replaced by another word now glowing faintly in the green light. Returned. The creature spoke with 1,000 voices, men, women, children, all at once. "You opened the graveward, Emily. Now the bound shall walk again." The air grew colder, the walls started trembling, and the ceiling began to crack. She ran toward the stairs, pounding on the stone door with everything she had. Dust fell from the ceiling as she screamed, "Please, let me out." Then, just when she thought she'd die there, a faint click echoed through the chamber. The stone door slowly began to open. Light spilled in from above, moonlight, silvery and calm. Emily didn't think twice. She ran up the steps, tripping and scraping her hands, not daring to look back. When she reached the surface, she collapsed beside the cracked gravestone, gasping, shaking, covered in dirt. But when she looked around, her breath froze. The cemetery wasn't the same. The trees were gone. The church was a smoldering ruin, half buried in ash. The air smelled like smoke and decay. And the gravestone before her now had only two names left: Emily Holloway, Caleb Rivers. The third name had vanished completely. She turned to the horizon, where she saw dozens of faint green lights moving among the graves. One by one, the stones were shifting, cracking open. She whispered, trembling, "Dear God, what did I do?" And from somewhere deep below, in a voice that echoed across the night, she heard the priest whisper, "You finished what I started." The night was no longer silent. It breathed. It pulsed. It moved. Emily stood frozen at the heart of the ruined cemetery, as the earth around her began to shudder with slow, rhythmic tremors, as though the ground itself had a heartbeat. The gravestones, once still and weathered, now groaned under unseen pressure. Cracks spiderwebbed across their surfaces, glowing faintly with the same sickly green hue she had seen inside the crypt. Each tremor grew stronger. The soil split open, releasing plumes of dark mist that slithered across the grass like smoke from a dying fire. And then, from beneath the ground, came the sound she would never forget: the soft scrape of nails on wood. Hundreds of them. Emily's breath hitched. Her flashlight barely pierced the gloom, its trembling beam catching glimpses of skeletal fingers clawing upward from the dirt. The mist coiled around her ankles like cold water, and with every heartbeat, more graves opened. The cemetery had become a breathing thing, alive, ancient, angry. Her instincts screamed to run, but where? The church was a ruin, the forest was gone, and even the road she came from had vanished, swallowed by the mist. Only the flickering moonlight illuminated the strange landscape, familiar yet wrong, like she had stepped into another version of the world, one buried beneath her own. She stumbled backward, gasping for air, when she heard a voice behind her. "Emily!" She spun around. Caleb was standing there, pale, bloodless, eyes clouded like fogged glass. He smiled faintly, a broken, eerie smile. "You left me," he whispered. "Caleb." Her voice cracked. How are you here? You were..." He took a step closer. "I was," he said softly. "And so were they." He gestured around at the awakening graves. "You brought us back, Emily. The grave word was sealed for a reason." She shook her head violently. "No, I didn't mean to. I was trying to escape." He cut her off, his tone shifting, deepening. "You can't escape what's already inside you." Her stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" Caleb's head tilted unnaturally, bones cracking beneath his skin. His voice changed, layered, distorted. "The names on the stone weren't a curse, Emily. They were binding marks, the ones chosen to contain the restless. You are the final vessel." The realization hit like an electric jolt. The grave that bore her name, it wasn't predicting her death. It was assigning her a role. Emily stumbled back, whispering to herself, No, that can't be true. I'm not." A voice thundered through the night, silencing her thoughts. "She is." The ground erupted beside her as the robed priest emerged from a pit of swirling mist, his lantern still burning with that unnatural green flame. Only now his face was half decayed, one side flesh, the other bone. His voice carried the weight of centuries. "The grave word binds 3 souls," he said, his tone echoing like a sermon from hell. "The keeper, the witness, and the vessel. I was the keeper, Caleb the witness, and you, Emily Holloway, are the vessel through which the seal must be reborn. Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. "I won't be your sacrifice," she screamed. The priest raised his hand, and the air grew thick, suffocating. "You misunderstand," he said, stepping closer. "You are not a sacrifice. You are the gate." Suddenly, pain shot through her chest like lightning. She fell to her knees, clutching herself as symbols began burning beneath her skin. The same ones carved on the crypt walls. The air filled with whispers, thousands of voices calling her name, pulling her consciousness toward something vast, ancient, and dark. Caleb knelt beside her, his expression mournful. "I tried to stop it," he whispered, "back then in the fire, but he made me the witness." Emily's vision blurred as she screamed through the pain. What happens now?" The priest answered for him. "Now the dead reclaim what was promised. The veil between life and death is torn, and you, child, are the thread that binds it." Lightning flashed above them, though no thunder followed. For a brief second, Emily saw the world flicker, the ruined cemetery replaced by a fiery vision of the past. The church alive and whole again, filled with people screaming as the ground split beneath them. Reverend Keaton stood at the altar, chanting verses from a blackened book as the congregation burned. It wasn't a church. It was a ritual site. The grave word was never built to honor the dead. It was built to contain them. The vision faded, leaving Emily trembling and sobbing in the cold wind. "You killed them all," she whispered, her voice filled with horror. "You buried them alive." The priest's expression didn't change. They were chosen to guard the boundary. Their souls keep the void from consuming your world, but the seal weakens, because the vessel resists. "I'm not part of this," she cried, trying to crawl away. The ground beneath her pulsed like flesh. "You were born to it," the priest said, voice rising. "The blood of the first keeper runs in your veins. You think it was curiosity that brought you here? No, Emily, it was inheritance." Her mind reeled. "My family?" "Your great-grandmother was the last vessel," he said. "But she failed to renew the seal when the church burned. You are her line's last echo. You are what the grave word has waited for." The priest's lantern flared brighter, blinding her. A column of green flame spiraled upward, illuminating the dead now standing among their graves. Hundreds of hollow, ghost-like figures, staring at her in silent expectation. Their eyes glowed faintly, not with malice, but with sorrow. "They don't want to harm you," the priest said softly. "They want to rest, but they cannot until you complete the rite." Caleb stepped closer, his expression torn. "If you resist, Emily, they'll never stop rising. The world above will drown in their hunger." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "You're asking me to die?" The priest's hollow gaze met hers. "To endure. The vessel does not die. She becomes the seal itself." She looked around, at the restless dead, at Caleb's empty eyes, at the smoldering ruin of the church where this nightmare began. Then she took a shaky breath. "And if I refuse?" The priest's smile was sorrowful. "Then the grave word falls, and the dead walk again." The wind roared through the cemetery as though the world itself was holding its breath. Emily's flashlight died completely, plunging everything into that ghostly green light. Her heartbeat slowed, echoing in her ears like a drum. She closed her eyes and whispered, "If this is my fate, then I'll end it on my terms." The priest tilted his head. "Meaning?" She opened her eyes, their reflection glowing faintly in the lantern's flame. "You said I'm the gate, but you never said which way it opens." Before he could react, she snatched the lantern from his grasp and smashed it against the ground. The green flame erupted, spilling across the soil like liquid fire. The priest screamed as the light consumed him, his body fracturing into dust. But the moment the lantern shattered, the world changed. The flame didn't vanish. It spread across every grave, every corpse, every name carved in stone. Caleb screamed her name, but she couldn't hear him anymore. The fire engulfed everything: sky, earth, stone, until the world became a roaring inferno of light and sound. And in that burning silence, Emily heard the voices again. Only this time they were calm, grateful. "Thank you, vessel. The gate is closed." Then everything went white. When Emily opened her eyes, she was lying in a hospital bed. The morning sun streamed through the window. A nurse smiled as she adjusted an IV drip. "You're lucky, miss," she said. "You were found unconscious near the old Holloway cemetery. People said it's been abandoned for nearly a century." Emily's lips trembled. "Cemetery?" The nurse nodded. "Yeah, creepy old place. They say it burned down in the 1800s. Emily turned to the window. In the reflection of the glass behind her, she saw faint green eyes watching. And somewhere, deep beneath the earth, the graveward pulsed once more. The world felt heavier after that night. The light was softer, the air thicker, and every sound carried an echo that didn't belong. Emily Holloway sat in her hospital bed, staring at her trembling hands. She should have felt relief. She was alive. Or at least, she thought she was. But something deep within her whispered otherwise. 3 days had passed since she'd been found by the roadside near the ruins of Holloway Cemetery. The doctors said she had hypothermia, mild dehydration, and traces of ash in her lungs, as if she'd been inside a fire. Yet there were no burns on her body. Only one strange mark remained: the faint outline of the same sigil carved on the gravestone, now burned into the skin over her heart like an invisible brand that sometimes glowed faintly in the dark. Her doctors brushed it off as a hallucination, trauma-induced imagination. But Emily knew better. The whispers hadn't stopped. They came in the silence between her heartbeats, murmuring from somewhere deep inside her mind. Sometimes she heard Caleb's voice, sometimes the priest's, and sometimes something else entirely. On the fourth night, when the hospital halls were quiet and the only sound was the rhythmic beeping of machines, she saw him. Caleb stood at the end of her bed, pale and translucent, his eyes filled with that same sorrow. "You shouldn't have broken the lantern," he said softly. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. "I freed them," she whispered. You said it would end the curse." Caleb shook his head slowly. "You freed them from the earth, yes, but not from the binding. The graveward isn't a place, Emily, it's a balance. You closed one gate, but another opened." Her pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, his figure flickering like candlelight. "You brought peace to the bound, but in doing so, you opened the outer gate, the one that keeps the dead from crossing back." Emily felt cold sweat run down her neck. "Back? You mean, into the living world?" He nodded. "The veil is thinning. They're not angry, not yet, but they're drawn to you. You are their beacon now." She wanted to scream, to deny it, but deep down she knew. The mirror beside her bed had been fogging on its own for days. Sometimes, when she turned off the lights, faint shapes would move behind her reflection, outlines of faces she didn't recognize. The next morning, she checked herself out against medical advice. She couldn't stay there, not while the air around her whispered her name. She drove back to Holloway in silence, through roads that seemed more deserted than she remembered. The town looked hollow, as if every building had aged 100 years overnight. Windows were boarded, signs faded, and even the birds avoided the sky. When she reached the cemetery, her car died without reason. No battery failure, no warning lights, just silence. She took it as a sign. The gate stood before her, rusted and half-collapsed. Beyond it lay the field of graves, now strangely untouched, as if the fire and the chaos had never happened. Even the old church looked whole again, standing proud and still beneath a bruised purple sky. But there was something off. Every gravestone had been replaced, clean, new marble. And on each one, the same symbol she had burned into her skin. Her breath caught. No, this isn't possible. A low voice answered from behind her. It's not only possible, it's ordained. Emily turned slowly. The priest was there, or rather, what was left of him. His body was no longer decayed, but luminous, like a spirit half-manifested. His lantern burned again in his hand, its green flame swaying gently. You destroyed the vessel, he said calmly. So the balance made another. Emily's voice trembled. Me. He nodded. You carry the grave word now. The dead whisper through you, feed through you, wait through you. And soon, they will demand passage. She clenched her fists. I won't let them out. He tilted his head. You misunderstand again. They don't want out. They want you with them. The vessel must return to the soil to seal the gate once more. Emily took a step back. You're lying. You want me dead. The priest's face softened with something almost like pity. Death is a mortal word. You cannot die, Emily Holloway. You can only join. The air thickened. Around her, the mist began to rise again, swirling with faint silhouettes. Dozens, then hundreds. Men, women, children, their translucent faces shimmering in the eerie light. Caleb stood among them, his eyes pleading. Don't fight it, he whispered. It's the only way to end this. Emily's voice broke. There has to be another way. There isn't, the priest said, his tone echoing through the still air. The grave word demands renewal every century. The seal weakens, the vessel returns, and the bound are calmed. That is the law written in blood and dust. She fell to her knees, trembling. Why me? Why my family? Because your line was chosen when the first gate opened, he said. You carry the blood of the keeper. It is your burden and your curse. Tears streaked her face as the spirits began to close in. Their whispers grew louder, not angry, not vengeful, but pleading. Rest, rest, rest. The priest extended his hand. Come, child. The soil remembers your name. Let it end in peace. Emily looked around at the sea of pale faces. For a moment she saw something beautiful. The sorrow in their eyes, the longing for silence, for release. She thought of the centuries they had waited beneath the earth, forgotten, chained by ritual. And she realized, maybe this wasn't death. Maybe this was mercy. She stood slowly, her body shaking. The wind died. The world fell completely silent. Will it stop? She whispered. If I go? The priest nodded. For another 100 years. Emily closed her eyes. Then let it be enough. She took his hand. His skin was cold. Not corpse cold, but the kind of cold that feels eternal. Endless. The lantern flared between them, and for a split second, she felt her heart stop. Her body dissolved into light, her pain, her fear, her memories, all unraveling into something vast and infinite. The spirits bowed their heads. The mist sank back into the soil. The graves grew still once more. And when the light faded, Emily Holloway was gone. Only the lantern remained, burning quietly in the grass, its green flame soft and steady. Months later, the cemetery became quiet again. The fires, the tremors, the strange stories, all forgotten. The church was restored as a historical site, attracting the curious and the faithful alike. One afternoon, a young woman wandered among the graves, tracing her fingers along the carved stones. She stopped at a new one, plain, marble white, with a simple inscription, Emily Holloway, 1996 to 2024. She kept the gate. The woman smiled faintly and turned to leave, but as she did, the faint glow of green flickered beneath the inscription, almost imperceptible. And if one listened closely, beneath the rustling leaves and the soft hum of the wind, there was a whisper, distant but unmistakable. The gate sleeps until the name is called again. The woman paused, frowning, her breath visible in the suddenly cold air. She turned, but the cemetery was empty. Only the faint outline of a lantern shimmered beside Emily's grave, its green flame flickering once, then vanishing completely. The silence that followed was perfect, too perfect. And somewhere deep underground, beneath layers of soil, ash, and time, the earth took its first slow, living breath once more. I've never been the type of person who believed in the supernatural. Growing up in a small town in Pennsylvania, I'd always heard stories about the local cemetery, how strange lights were seen at night, how people claimed to hear whispers when no one was there, and how some teenagers who dared to sneak in after midnight swore they felt watched. To me, all of that was just folklore, kids trying to scare one another, or adults exaggerating to keep us out of trouble. I never thought I'd find myself in a position where I'd question everything I believed. But then came the night that changed my life forever. It was late October, one of those chilly autumn evenings when the air has that sharp bite that cuts through your jacket. I was 23 at the time, fresh out of college and back in town visiting my parents for the weekend. A couple of old friends from high school invited me to hang out, and, fueled by beer and nostalgia, the night ended with us daring each other to sneak into the graveyard just outside town, the one we'd been warned about since childhood. I wasn't drunk, but I was buzzed enough to think it would be funny to finally put those old legends to rest. There were 4 of us, me, Tyler, Josh, and Hannah. We parked Tyler's beat-up Chevy by the side of the road and hopped the low stone wall that circled the graveyard. The place looked exactly as it had when I was a kid. Rows of crooked headstones leaning like tired soldiers, patches of unkempt grass, and a set of giant oak trees whose branches hung low enough to scrape your shoulders if you weren't careful. The sky was moonless, which meant the graveyard was swallowed in shadows. I had to use my phone flashlight just to see the ground. The deeper we went, the quieter it became. You don't notice it at first, but cemeteries have this strange stillness to them, like the air itself is holding its breath. We joked around at first, laughing too loudly, trying to cover up how uneasy we actually felt. Josh, who always had a cruel streak, suggested we play a game. Each of us had to split off, walk to the farthest corner of the graveyard, and touch the oldest headstone we could find. Whoever chickened out first would have to buy breakfast in the morning. Reluctantly, we agreed. That's when the night stopped feeling like a harmless dare. I walked alone, my light bobbing over names etched into weathered stone. Some were from the 1800s, their inscriptions nearly worn away by time. As I moved deeper, the air grew colder, and the crunch of leaves beneath my shoes seemed deafening in the silence. I remember thinking how strange it was that no insects chirped, no owls hooted, just the sound of my own breathing. And then I saw it, a headstone unlike the others, much larger, made of black granite, its surface strangely clean compared to the moss-covered markers around it. The inscription was simple: Elizabeth Crane, 1821-1844. She waits. That last part, she waits, made my stomach twist. I thought maybe it was some poetic phrase or a family motto, but something about the words felt wrong, like it wasn't meant for the living to read. I reached out, intending to brush my hand against it and be done. But the second my fingers touched the cold stone, a noise cut through the silence. A faint whisper, so soft I couldn't make out the words. My first instinct was that one of my friends was screwing with me, but when I spun around, my light revealed nothing but endless rows of graves. That's when I saw the shadow. It wasn't cast by my flashlight. It moved against it. A tall, thin figure gliding between the headstones, just at the edge of my vision. My pulse spiked. I called out, thinking it had to be Tyler or Josh, but no one answered. Instead, the whisper returned, clearer this time, though still distorted by the wind. It said my name. I don't know how to describe the feeling of hearing your own name spoken in a place like that. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, like it pressed against my chest from the inside. I stumbled back, my light shaking as it swept across the graves. That's when I realized something even more terrifying. Every headstone I passed on the way in, the names had changed. Where once there had been James Carter or Anna Whitmore, now every single stone bore my last name. Mahoney, Mahoney, Mahoney. Over and over, etched in stone. My hands went numb. I backed up, tripping over a root, and when I hit the ground, the air suddenly filled with the sound of crying. Not loud sobs, soft, pained weeping coming from all around me, from beneath the ground. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't care about the game anymore. I didn't care about breakfast or dares. I just wanted out. But no matter which way I turned, the rows of graves stretched endlessly, the wall nowhere in sight. It was as if the graveyard had grown, reshaping itself to keep me inside. And then, I saw her. A woman standing beneath one of the oaks. Her dress was from another century, torn and stained, her skin pale as candle wax. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt frozen, like my body didn't belong to me anymore. Slowly, she raised her hand and pointed, not at me, but at the stone I'd touched. Elizabeth Crane's grave. The whispers rose into a chorus, hundreds of voices overlapping, all murmuring the same phrase over and over. She waits, she waits, she waits. And in that moment, I understood. Elizabeth Crane wasn't just buried there. She was still there, waiting, not for peace, not for God, but for someone like me. Someone stupid enough to touch her stone and wake her up. My vision blurred, the ground tilted, and the last thing I remember before blacking out was her face, stretched into a smile that looked more like a wound than an expression. When I woke, it was morning. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and I was lying just outside the cemetery wall, dirt under my nails and blood on my palms like I'd clawed my way out. My friends were gone. Tyler's truck was gone. My phone too. I stumbled home in a daze, trying to piece it all together. My parents were furious, saying Tyler had dropped me off hours earlier and told them I'd been acting weird, like I was in shock. They hadn't seen Hannah or Josh either. No one has. Not to this day. But here's the part that still keeps me awake at night, years later. A week after that night, I returned to the graveyard in broad daylight, determined to prove to myself that it was all some drunken hallucination. I found Elizabeth Crane's stone easily. It was still black, still spotless, still inscribed with those chilling words. But when I leaned closer, my blood ran cold. Beneath her name, a new line had been carved into the granite. And so does he. And under that was my name. People don't like to talk about what happened in my hometown back in 2015. It's one of those things that gets passed around in whispers, half-truths mixed with rumor, until no one's sure where the story ends and the legend begins. But I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. And no matter how much I've tried to move on, I can't escape it. Every night when I close my eyes, I still hear the sound, that awful sound of shovels in the dirt when no one's supposed to be digging. I grew up in Vermont in a small town tucked between rolling hills and endless stretches of forest. We had one graveyard, old, neglected, and mostly forgotten. It wasn't the kind of place people visited. Families moved away, lines died out, and the graves just sat there untended like scars in the earth. When I was 19, I took a part-time job with the local groundskeeping service. Most of the work was mowing, cleaning up branches after storms, and hauling trash. One day, my boss told me we'd gotten a special request. A wealthy family had recently purchased land just outside town, and they wanted their ancestors' graves exhumed from the old cemetery and moved to a new family plot they'd built on their estate. It sounded weird, but money was money. So there I was, late one Friday evening, standing in the middle of that overgrown graveyard with two other guys from the crew. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple, and the shadows stretched long over the crooked stones. Our boss had given us strict instructions. Start the digging tonight, finish tomorrow, and get it done quietly. He didn't want rumors spreading about us moving bodies. I remember the first grave we worked on. The stone was barely legible, the date from 1873. We set up floodlights, fired up the generator, and got to work. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. It felt wrong, disturbing the ground like that, but none of us said anything. We just kept digging, our shovels clanking against rocks, the soil cold and heavy. It wasn't long before we hit the coffin. The wood was soft, falling apart as soon as we touched it. Inside were just bones, fragile and yellowed with age. We transferred them into a bag, sealed it, and set it aside. I tried not to think about how someone's entire life had been reduced to a sack of brittle fragments, but it was the second grave that changed everything. The stone was different, black, polished, and surprisingly well preserved. The name read, Nathaniel Crow, 1819-1881. As soon as we started digging, I noticed the soil was different. It was darker, almost black, and damp in a way that didn't make sense. It clung to the shovel, heavy and sticky, as if it didn't want to be moved. The deeper we dug, the worse the smell became, not just earth and rot, but something sharp, metallic, like iron. When the shovel hit the coffin, it didn't splinter like the first one. It rang. Hollow, metallic. Confused, we cleared the dirt away, and what we uncovered didn't look like any coffin I'd ever seen. It was iron, sealed tight, with strange markings etched into the lid, symbols I couldn't recognize. We exchanged uneasy looks. One of the guys, Mark, joked that it looked like a vampire's coffin. Nobody laughed. We should have stopped right there. We should have covered it back up and walked away. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and our boss was expecting results. So we pried it open. The lid groaned as the bolts gave way, and the moment the seal broke, a gust of air rushed out, stale, cold, and reeking of something sour. Inside wasn't just a skeleton. It was a body, perfectly preserved, like the man had only just died. His skin was pale, stretched tight over his bones, his black suit immaculate despite the century that had passed. His eyes were closed, but I swear to God, I could see movement beneath the lids. We staggered back, gagging from the smell, but something held us there. A presence heavy and suffocating, pressing down like the air itself had thickened. Mark muttered that we needed to close it, but before we could, the generator cut out. The floodlights blinked off, plunging us into darkness. And that's when we heard it. The sound of breathing. Not ours, something else. Slow, deliberate inhales and exhales coming from the coffin. I fumbled for my flashlight, but the batteries flickered weakly, barely piercing the dark. In that thin beam, I saw his eyes. They were open now. Pale, cloudy, but alive, staring right at me. I froze. My body refused to move. Then his lips parted, dry and cracked, and a low whisper escaped. "Bury me back." The words slithered into my ears, oily and cold. Mark screamed, dropped his shovel, and bolted into the trees. The other guy, Danny, stumbled backward, tripped over a stone, and fell hard. I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. Those eyes held me in place like chains. Then, suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled. Not like an earthquake, more like something shifting beneath the soil, stretching, cracking. Around us, other graves began to stir. Dirt shifted, stones rattled, and faint, muffled sounds echoed up from the earth. Knocking, scratching, begging. Danny scrambled to his feet and grabbed my arm, snapping me out of it. We ran, leaving everything, the tools, the lights, even the open coffin behind. Mark was nowhere in sight. We didn't stop until we were back on the road, gasping for breath, our clothes smeared with dirt. When we returned with the boss the next morning, the site looked Normal. The coffin was gone, the hole filled as if we'd never dug it. The ground was smooth, untouched, but Mark never came back. His family reported him missing. The police searched the area, found no trace. Danny and I told them he must have run off, but we knew better. We just couldn't prove it. That night, I dreamed of Nathaniel Crowe. He stood at the foot of my bed, dirt dripping from his suit, his eyes glowing faintly in the dark. He leaned down, close enough that I could smell the sour stench of the coffin, and whispered the same words again. "Bury me back." I woke drenched in sweat, my sheets tangled around me. The next day, Danny called me in a panic. He'd heard the same voice, the same words whispered through his bedroom window, even though he lived on the second floor. For weeks, we lived in terror. Every night, the voice came. Sometimes from outside the door, sometimes from the closet, sometimes from right beside my bed. "Bury me back, bury me back." Danny couldn't take it. One night, he went back to the graveyard alone. His mother found his truck parked by the stone wall the next morning, but no sign of him. Just footprints leading into the cemetery, and none coming out. I left town soon after. I thought maybe if I put enough distance between myself and that graveyard, it would stop. For a while, it did. I built a new life, got a new job, tried to forget. But 2 months ago, on a perfectly ordinary night in my new apartment hundreds of miles away, I woke to the sound of shovels. That scraping, digging sound coming from the corner of my room. When I turned on the light, the carpet was torn, soil scattered across the floorboards, fresh and black. And written in that soil, with long, deliberate strokes, were the words, "You didn't bury me back." When I was younger, I used to romanticize the idea of working nights. Something about being awake while the world slept made me feel different, almost important. That's why when I landed a security job at St. Mary's Cemetery on the outskirts of Hartford, Connecticut, I thought I'd struck gold. A quiet paycheck for doing almost nothing. Just strolling through headstones with a flashlight, making sure teenagers weren't sneaking in to drink or vandalize. Easy work. But the truth is, the night doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the things that thrive when the rest of the world isn't looking. I learned that the hard way. St. Mary's was old, sprawling across acres of land, with graves dating back to the Civil War. During the day it looked peaceful, almost beautiful, with rows of marble stones and well-tended lawns. But at night, it was a different world. The trees bent low like skeletal arms, the shadows stretched unnaturally, and the silence had a depth that pressed against your ears. My shifts started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. The first week was uneventful. I'd make rounds every hour, radio in if I saw anything suspicious, and kill time scrolling on my phone. The strangest thing I encountered was a raccoon knocking over a trash can. But on my second week, something changed. It was a Wednesday night, clear skies, the moon bright enough to paint the headstones silver. Around midnight, I was making my rounds near the farthest section of the cemetery, where the oldest graves were. That's when I noticed something unusual. One of the mausoleum doors was slightly open. Now, these mausoleums were old stone structures sealed shut decades ago. No one went in, no one came out. The door being open made no sense. I radioed it in, but static hissed back, my voice swallowed by white noise. Annoyed, I decided to check it myself. I pushed the heavy iron door and it groaned loudly, the sound echoing like a scream in the quiet night. Inside, my flashlight beam revealed rows of stone crypts, dust thick on the floor, spider webs hanging like curtains. But one of the crypts stood out. Its slab was shifted just enough to leave a gap. I told myself it was vandals, probably kids trying to freak each other out. But when I leaned closer, I noticed something that froze my blood. The dust on the floor wasn't undisturbed like the rest of the mausoleum. It was smeared, streaked, as if something had been dragged out. That was the first night I heard the singing. At first it was so faint I thought it was the wind, a soft lilting tune like a lullaby. It floated through the mausoleum, echoing off the stone, seeping into my ears. I backed out quickly, shut the door, and told myself I'd report it in the morning. But as I walked away, the tune followed me, growing louder, sweeter, like it wanted me to listen. The next night, it happened again. This time, the singing came not just from the mausoleum, but from different corners of the graveyard, weaving through the air like invisible threads. I couldn't tell if it was one voice or many, but it was always the same tune, soft, haunting, almost comforting. Almost. I tried to ignore it, but by the third night, it became impossible. The singing grew clearer, and with it came words. I couldn't understand them at first, strange syllables that rolled like whispers. But eventually, I began to recognize fragments. My name, spoken softly, hidden in the melody. That's when I started to lose sleep. Even when I went home in the morning, exhausted, I'd hear the tune faintly in the hum of my fridge, the buzz of the street outside. It followed me, like a shadow. I told my supervisor, but he laughed it off. Said I'd been spending too much time alone, letting my imagination run wild. But I knew what I heard. I knew it was real. On the fourth night, I decided to record it. I brought a small digital recorder, turned it on, and left it in my pocket while I made rounds. Sure enough, the singing began around midnight. Clear, sweet, unmistakable. I felt both terrified and relieved. Finally, proof. But when I played it back the next morning, there was nothing. Just silence. That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with something normal. By the fifth night, the singing no longer stayed at a distance. It was close now, right behind me, as I walked the rows of graves. I'd spin around, flashlight cutting through the dark, but there was never anyone there. Yet the air would be warm, like someone had just breathed against my neck. I stopped making full rounds. I stayed near the office, lights on, doors locked, praying for the dawn. But even inside, the singing seeped through the walls, curling around me like smoke. And then came the dreams. I'd fall asleep at home and find myself back in the cemetery, always the same spot, standing before the mausoleum with the shifted crypt. The door would swing open on its own, the lullaby spilling out like perfume. And I'd see her, a woman in a long white dress, her hair black and tangled, her face pale as marble. She never spoke, never moved, just stood in the shadows of the mausoleum singing that awful song. But her eyes were always on me. I started avoiding sleep altogether. Coffee, energy drinks, anything to keep me awake. My body was breaking down, but I couldn't face her again. The final night of my job, I didn't even mean to fall asleep. I was in the office, head on the desk, and the next thing I knew, I was standing in the cemetery again, dreaming. Except it didn't feel like a dream this time. The cold bit into my skin. The grass was damp under my shoes, and the air reeked of soil and stone. The singing was louder than ever, drawing me to the mausoleum. I fought it, tried to turn away, but my legs moved on their own, dragging me forward like I was a puppet on strings. The door creaked open, and there she was. But this time, she stepped out. Her dress dragged along the ground, stained with dirt. Her face was cracked like porcelain, and from those cracks, black soil spilled as if she wasn't filled with flesh and blood, but earth itself. She reached out a hand, her fingers long, sharp, and caked with dirt. "Stay," she whispered. Not sung, whispered. And the moment the word left her lips, every grave in the cemetery groaned. The ground shifted, and from the soil, hands began to push up. Dozens of them, pale and broken, clawing their way out. I ran. I don't remember how or where. I only remember waking up on my apartment floor the next morning, mud smeared across my carpet, dirt under my fingernails. I quit the job immediately, packed up, and left Hartford. I told myself it was just exhaustion, just nightmares bleeding into reality. I almost believed it. Until last week. I was driving late at night through a different town, miles away from Connecticut. The radio was on low, just static between stations. And through that static, I heard it, The lullaby. Soft. Sweet. My name woven into the tune. And in the rearview mirror, for just a second, I saw her, sitting in the back seat, pale face cracked, soil spilling from her smile. There are some jobs you take because you need the money, and there are others you take because you don't know any better. I took mine out of desperation. Rent was overdue, bills stacked on the counter, and my car was one bad noise away from the junkyard. So when I saw a Craigslist ad looking for overnight caretakers at a cemetery outside of Cleveland, I didn't think twice. The pay was decent, and the ad made it sound simple. Keep watch, report trespassers, lock up the gates at dawn. Easy money. The place was called Green Hollow Cemetery, and from the moment I saw it, something about it felt wrong. It wasn't the graves themselves. Every cemetery looks eerie if you stare too long. It was the layout. The headstones weren't lined up neatly but scattered, crooked, like they'd been dropped carelessly. The ground dipped in strange angles, as though it was sinking in places. And the air smelled like rusted iron, even on clear nights. My first night there, the manager, an older guy named Harris, gave me a quick tour. He seemed jittery, glancing over his shoulder as though he couldn't wait to leave. "You don't need to do much," he said. "Just make rounds every couple hours, make sure the lights are on, don't let anyone wander in, and don't go near the north section." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He didn't laugh back. When I asked why, he muttered something about the ground being unstable, unsafe, but the way his eyes darted away told me there was more to it. That first shift was uneventful. I walked the paths, sipped my coffee, killed time scrolling on my phone. But around 2 a.m. I noticed something strange. From the north section, the very place Harris told me to avoid, I saw movement. A figure, pale and thin, drifting between the stones. I froze. It wasn't unusual for drunk kids to sneak in, but this wasn't that. Whoever it was moved too slowly, too smoothly, like they weren't walking but gliding. My flashlight beam cut across the rows of graves, but the figure slipped away before I could get a clear look. That night I didn't go near the north section, but the next morning curiosity gnawed at me. So after my shift, instead of heading straight home, I walked back in daylight. The north section looked different from the rest of the cemetery. The grass was brittle, yellow, dead in patches. The headstones were older, their names almost erased by weather. In the center stood a single massive tree, gnarled, blackened, its branches bare even in spring. At its base was a stone unlike any I'd ever seen. Not a normal headstone, but a slab, flat and wide, covered in symbols I couldn't read. It looked ancient, older than the cemetery itself. The air around it was colder, sharper, like standing in the shade even under the sun. Something about it unsettled me so badly I left without touching it. But that night, things began to change. Around midnight, while making my rounds, I heard it. A low hum, almost like chanting. It came from the north section. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming at me to stay away, but the sound grew louder, pulling me toward it. Against my better judgment, I followed. When I reached the tree, the chanting stopped. The night was dead silent, too silent as if the world had been muted. And then I saw it. The slab was glowing faintly, a sickly green light seeping from the cracks in the stone. I stood frozen, unable to breathe, until a voice snapped me out of it. Not a human voice, but something deep, layered, as though multiple people were speaking at once. "Stay away." The words echoed in my chest more than in my ears. My flashlight flickered violently before dying completely, plunging me into darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw shapes rising from the ground, long, twisted shadows reaching for me. I bolted, running faster than I ever had in my life, not stopping until I was back in the office with the door locked tight. I didn't tell Harris. I didn't tell anyone. I told myself it was exhaustion, a trick of the light, stress. But the next night, the same thing happened. And the night after that. The chanting, the glow, the voice, always pulling me back to that slab, like it wanted me to see more. On the fourth night, I caved. I approached the slab, flashlight trembling in my hand. The glow was stronger now, spilling across the grass like liquid. And carved into the stone beneath the symbols was a name. My name. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. That's impossible, I thought. Some sick prank, maybe? But no. Those letters were etched deep, weathered by time, as though they'd been there long before I was born. That night, the dreams began. I'd find myself lying on that slab, the tree's bare branches curling above me like claws. Dozens of figures stood around the stone, their faces hidden, chanting in that low, guttural hum. And always, at the end of the dream, the ground would split open, and hands, rotting, skeletal hands, would claw their way out, reaching for me. I stopped sleeping. Coffee and energy drinks kept me going, but the hallucinations crept in. I'd see faces in the headstones, eyes in the shadows, lips moving silently in the dark. By the sixth night, I'd had enough. I told Harris I was quitting, effective immediately. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded and said, "You lasted longer than most." But leaving didn't save me. 2 weeks after I quit, I woke in the middle of the night to find dirt on my bedroom floor. My shoes caked in mud, though I hadn't been outside. And in the corner of my room, carved deep into the plaster, was the same name, the one on the slab. Mine. I moved, packed everything, left Cleveland behind. I thought I could outrun it. But last night, while driving home from work in a completely different state, I passed a small graveyard. Out of the corner of my eye, through the trees, I saw it. The same gnarled tree, the same cracked slab glowing faintly beneath it. And I swear, I could hear the chanting again. This time it was louder. This time, it was calling me closer. I grew up in a small New England town, the kind of place where every street had its history and every family seemed to carry generations of secrets. About 3 miles outside of town, hidden behind a curtain of overgrown pine trees and thorny brush, sat a graveyard most people didn't even know existed. It wasn't listed on the town's records, nor was it maintained by the church. The locals called it Whispering Pines Cemetery, though no one could tell me where the name came from. The place was old, the tombstones leaning and cracked, some swallowed by roots and vines. When I was younger, I always assumed the graveyard was just abandoned land. One of those forgotten places people leave behind when towns expand and generations move on. But by the time I turned 25, I learned that some things aren't forgotten at all. They wait, patiently. My first encounter with Whispering Pines wasn't intentional. I had taken a wrong turn one autumn evening while driving home after a late shift at the diner. My GPS signal had cut out, and before I realized it, I was on a dirt road flanked by looming pine trees. When my headlights swept across a clearing, I caught sight of weathered stone crosses and crooked headstones. For some reason, instead of turning back, I pulled over. The air outside felt unnaturally still, as though the forest itself held its breath. The silence was heavy, pressing down on me until even the sound of my own footsteps felt too loud. The only movement came from the wind, teasing the tops of the pines, which created an eerie, whisper-like murmur. That's when I noticed something strange. Amid the tangle of weeds and moss-covered markers, there was a fresh bouquet of flowers, laid carefully on one of the graves. Someone was taking care of this place. I left quickly that night, unsettled but curious. Over the next week, I found my mind drifting back to the cemetery, like a splinter beneath the skin. Against my better judgment, I went back the following Saturday, this time in daylight. The graves were even older than I'd thought. Most inscriptions had been erased by weather, some dating back to the 1700s. Yet the same grave had fresh flowers. They were different this time, daisies instead of roses, but still vibrant, as if someone had placed them there that very morning. That was the first time I met him. He appeared suddenly, a tall man in a dark overcoat and wide-brimmed hat, stepping from the shade of the trees as though he had been watching me all along. His face was pale, almost waxy, his features sharp. His eyes, however, were the kind that pinned you where you stood, unblinking, gray, and cold. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low but steady, carrying an authority that made my stomach twist. I stammered some excuse about curiosity, but he cut me off. "These grounds are not for the living. Go home, and don't return." But I did return. Again and again. Something about the place, and about him, pulled at me. I began noticing things I had missed before. The way no leaves ever seemed to settle on the graves, the faint smell of candle wax lingering in the air, and the distant sound of whispering voices that grew louder the longer I stayed. One evening, determined to learn more, I lingered after dusk. The man emerged from the shadows again, but this time he didn't order me to leave. Instead, he asked me a question. "Do you believe the dead can remember?" I didn't know how to answer. He smiled faintly, though it wasn't a kind smile. "They do. They remember everything." Then he walked past me, kneeling at the same grave where the flowers always appeared. He whispered something I couldn't hear, and I swear, though I will never be able to prove it, that the soil moved. Just slightly. I should have run. I should have never gone back. But obsession has a way of taking hold. I began researching whispering pines, scouring old newspapers, town archives, anything I could find. What I uncovered made no sense. According to town records, the land had been unused since the late 1800s. There were no burial permits, no mention of a cemetery at all. And yet, headstones stood, bodies lay beneath them, and someone was tending to them. Weeks turned into months, and my visits grew longer. The man, who eventually introduced himself only as the keeper, began speaking to me in fragments, riddles I couldn't quite piece together. Every soul deserves remembrance. A name unspoken is a life erased. To forget is to kill twice. The last time I saw him, winter had just begun, and the cemetery was cloaked in snow. The keeper was waiting for me, standing beside the same grave as always, but this time there were no flowers. Instead, there was an empty space where a stone had been removed. A gaping, freshly dug hole. He looked at me with those gray eyes and said, "It's your turn." At first I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking, but he stepped aside, and I saw what was carved into the newly unearthed headstone leaning against a tree. My name, my full name, my date of birth, and a death date, today. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, demanding answers, but the keeper only repeated the same words. "The dead remember. They've chosen you." I don't remember how I escaped. I just remember running, tripping over roots and tearing through the pines until I reached the road. When I turned back, the cemetery was gone. Not hidden. Gone. Nothing but trees and untouched snow. I tried returning later, in daylight. But no matter how far I drove along that dirt road, Whispering Pines Cemetery was nowhere to be found. And yet, every year since that night, on the anniversary of the date carved into that stone, I find fresh flowers at my doorstep. Always the same kind the keeper used to place, always tied with the same black ribbon. I don't know when they'll finally dig my grave, but I know this. When they do, the keeper will be waiting. I've never written something like this before. Honestly, I don't even know if I should be putting it out there, but every time I try to sleep, I see his face. And if I don't let this out, if I don't share what happened to me, I'm terrified he'll come back. People think horror is just a story, some clever fiction someone types up in a dim room for the thrill of others. But what happened to me at the graveward wasn't a story. It was a memory carved into my bones. It started about 3 years ago when I was working the night shift at a small cemetery just outside a quiet town in Pennsylvania. You wouldn't believe how many cemeteries still employ night guards. My official title was groundskeeper, but in reality it was just babysitting tombstones. The graveyard wasn't big, maybe 200 graves, with iron gates at the front and an old chapel at the back. There was a stone path running through the middle, with oak trees leaning in like ancient watchers. When I first took the job, my friends laughed. "What's there to guard, zombies?" they joke. But the truth is, graveyards get plenty of trespassers, drunk teens, vandals, people trying to film cheap horror TikToks. And I needed the money. My wife was pregnant at the time, and the thought of bringing in steady income, even if it meant staying awake while others slept, felt worth it. The first few nights were uneventful. I'd sit in the tiny shack by the gate, sip coffee from a thermos, and listen to the wind scrape through the branches. Sometimes I'd walk the paths with a flashlight just to stretch my legs. It was peaceful, in a strange way. But by the third week I noticed something odd. Every night, between 2:30 and 3 a.m., I'd catch sight of someone standing far back near the chapel. At first I thought it was a trick of the shadows, but then one night I saw it clearly. A man, tall and unnaturally thin, wearing a black coat that reached down to his ankles. His head always tilted slightly, like he was studying something no one else could see. The moment my flashlight beam reached him, he'd vanish, not walk away, just gone. I kept telling myself it had to be someone messing with me. Maybe a homeless guy, maybe a prankster. But then the pattern got worse. No matter what path I walked, no matter what angle, I'd glimpse him at the edge of my vision. By the fifth night, I couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, frustrated, I decided to chase him. I spotted him standing between two tall headstones, facing me directly this time. His face was pale, too pale, almost glowing under the moonlight. His eyes were sunken, black pits, yet I could feel his stare piercing me. My breath hitched, but I forced myself forward. "Hey!" I yelled, trying to sound braver than I felt. I bolted toward him, boots crunching against gravel, my flashlight bouncing wildly. I must have run 40 feet in seconds, heart hammering in my throat. But when I got there, nothing. Just the cold air, the smell of damp soil, and silence so heavy it pressed into my ears. That was the first night I thought about quitting. But bills pile up fast, and I convinced myself I was overtired. Maybe I was seeing things. Maybe the long hours and caffeine were messing with my head. A week later, I realized it wasn't my imagination. It was a stormy night, rain lashing against the gate, when I saw him again. Only this time, he wasn't standing by the chapel. He was standing inside the shack with me. I swear to God I hadn't heard the door creak, hadn't felt a shift in the air. I just turned my head, and there he was, leaning in the corner, dripping wet, that long coat trailing puddles on the floor. His face was sharper up close, like skin stretched too tightly over bone. His lips curled into something that could have been mistaken for a smile, except it was too wide, too unnatural. I froze. My hand hovered over the radio, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe properly. He whispered something, but the words came out garbled, like static in an old TV. Then, he was gone. No sound, no trace, just the faint smell of earth and rot. I told myself I imagined it, but when I looked down, I saw wet footprints leading to the corner where he'd stood. From that night forward, I stopped sitting in the shack. I kept moving, kept walking, as if the constant motion would keep him from catching up. But he always did. Sometimes I'd see him behind a tree, sometimes by the gate. Once, I swear, I saw him standing on top of a grave mound, his head tilted, watching me like a hawk about to strike. Sleep became impossible. Even during the day, when I tried to nap, I'd jolt awake, convinced I saw him in the shadows of my room. My wife noticed how pale I'd gotten, how jumpy I was. But what was I supposed to say? "Honey, I think a ghost won't leave me alone." The breaking point came one night when I found a grave that shouldn't have been there. I was making my rounds, flashlight sweeping the rows, when I spotted fresh dirt near the northern fence. A grave, but not one I recognized. The headstone looked old, weathered, as though it had been there for decades. But I knew every inch of that cemetery. I'd mowed the grass, trimmed the weeds. That grave hadn't been there before. My chest tightened. I forced myself closer. The inscription on the stone was almost illegible, worn by time, but I made out 2 words carved deep. The Watcher. I didn't realize I'd dropped my flashlight until I bent down to grab it, hands trembling. When I stood back up, he was standing directly behind the headstone. This time he spoke clearly. His voice was low, guttural, like the grinding of a coffin lid. "You're late." I staggered back, my legs giving out beneath me. My flashlight flickered, and when it steadied, he was gone. Only the grave remained, damp soil sinking slightly as if something inside had just shifted. The next morning, I tried to report it to my boss. I didn't mention the man, just the mysterious grave. But when I brought him to the spot, nothing. The grass was untouched, no grave, no headstone, no sign of fresh soil. My boss gave me a long look and told me to take the night off. But I knew what I saw. That night I dreamed of the grave. I dreamed of being lowered into it, soil piling on top of me as the Watcher stood above, whispering the same words over and over. "You're late. You're late. You're late." When I woke up, my wife said I'd been thrashing, gasping for air, clawing at my own chest. The final night I worked there, I made a choice I regret every day. I went back, determined to face him, to prove to myself he wasn't real, or to end whatever curse he'd laid on me. At exactly 2:45 a.m., I stood by the chapel, flashlight in one hand, shovel in the other. I don't know why I brought the shovel. Maybe because deep down, I knew what he wanted. I didn't have to wait long. He appeared at the edge of the chapel steps, pale face glowing, lips curled into that unnatural grin. Slowly, deliberately, he raised one hand and pointed toward the ground. And there it was again, the grave. Fresh, damp soil waiting for me. My hands shook, but I dug. I don't know why. Maybe I was compelled. Maybe I was insane. Maybe the grave had been meant for me all along. The deeper I dug, the colder the air got until I could see my breath clouding in the beam of the flashlight. Finally, the shovel struck something solid. Wood. A coffin. My pulse roared in my ears. With trembling hands, I pried it open, and inside, staring up at me with wide, lifeless eyes, was me. My own face, my own body, and the Watcher's whisper, colder than the grave itself, filled my ears one last time. "You're late." I've never told anyone this story outside of a single late-night post on a forum that eventually got deleted. Maybe that was for the best. People don't want the truth when it's darker than their imagination. They just want a neat story, a jump scare, something to talk about before bed. But this wasn't a story. This was my life, and every night I hear it, like a dull echo from beneath the ground. The bell. When I was 24, broke and desperate, I took a caretaker job at an abandoned cemetery in Vermont. Unlike most graveyards, this one wasn't attached to a church. It sat alone on a hill, surrounded by pine woods that creaked even when the air was still. Nobody had been buried there in decades. The town had long since moved on to a newer cemetery closer to the church. But still, someone was paying the town to keep the old one maintained, and my job was to keep vandals away. The first time I saw the cemetery, I thought it looked wrong. Not scary, just wrong, like a photograph that's slightly tilted but you can't figure out why. The tombstones leaned in awkward angles, many of them cracked or sunken. But what disturbed me most were the bells. Every single grave had one. Little iron bells mounted on thin poles, with frayed cords leading down into the earth, tied to the coffins below. It was an old custom, I learned. Back in the 1800s, when people feared being buried alive, they'd tie a cord to the dead person's wrist. If the dead person woke up underground, they could ring the bell for help. That's why the cemetery was called Graveward Hollow. Most of the bells were rusted, broken, dangling like rotted teeth, but some still stood, fragile and sharp against the skyline. My boss told me not to worry about them. "Kids pull the cord sometimes, try to spook people," he said. "Ignore it." The first 2 nights were quiet. I sat in my pickup with the heater running, headlights cutting into the fog that always seemed to roll down from the woods. I walked the grounds a few times with a flashlight, crunching over dead leaves, but saw nothing unusual. On the third night, though, it happened. I was sitting in the truck, half asleep, when I heard it. The bell. It wasn't loud, not at first. Just a faint tink, 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 carried on the wind. At first I thought it was the storm rattling metal, but then it grew louder, clearer. Not random, not from the wind. Someone was ringing it. I got out of the truck, flashlight in hand, my breath smoking in the cold. The sound echoed across the graveyard, tinny and metallic, bouncing between the stones. I followed it, weaving through the rows of graves, my boots sinking slightly into damp soil. Finally, I found it. The bell. Shiny compared to the others, polished somehow, though I swore it had been rusted when I first saw it. The cord quivered, taut, as though someone below was yanking on it desperately. I froze. My rational brain screamed, "It's a prank. Kids are hiding. They rigged it." But every hair on my body stood on end. Against my better judgment, I knelt beside the grave. The headstone was so worn I could barely make out the name, Elias Ward. The cord shook violently, pulling the bell harder. Tink, 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 tink. I should have left. Should have run back to my truck, driven away, quit the job, never looked back. But something in me, curiosity, dread, I don't know, made me put my ear to the ground. And that's when I heard it. Not just the bell. A voice, muffled, ragged, gasping. "Help. Please. Let me out." I stumbled back, my chest seizing. I wanted to scream, but the air caught in my throat. My flashlight beam jittered across the grave, and for one horrific second, I saw the soil shift, as though something beneath it had just pressed upward. I ran. I don't remember how long. When I reached the truck, I locked the doors and sat there trembling until dawn. By the time I worked up the courage to return to that grave, the bell was rusted again, dangling lifelessly. I tried to convince myself it was a dream, a hallucination from lack of sleep. But the next night, it happened again. This time, it wasn't one bell. It was 3. 3 different graves, all ringing in uneven rhythms like a broken orchestra. Tink, 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 tink. I didn't dare go closer. I just stood at the edge of the path, flashlight flickering, heart pounding as the sound rose and rose. And then it stopped, dead silent. Except for one voice that floated up from the dark. "We're not dead." After that night, I begged my boss to reassign me. He laughed it off, told me I was too imaginative, that kids were probably setting up fishing lines to mess with me. I quit the job a week later. But the story doesn't end there, because the bells followed me. I first noticed it at home, a week after I quit. I was lying in bed with my girlfriend when I heard it outside the window. Faint, almost imperceptible. Tink. I sat up, heart slamming. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" she mumbled, half asleep. The sound didn't come again that night. But 2 days later, when I was taking out the trash, I heard it from the woods behind my apartment. A single bell ringing slowly. Tink, tink, tink. It grew more frequent. At the grocery store, in the laundromat, even at work. Always faint, always distant, but always there. One night, desperate, I drove back to the cemetery. I thought maybe if I confronted it, it would end. The place was darker than I remembered, the trees like skeletal hands clawing at the sky. The bells started the moment I stepped out of the truck. Not faint this time, deafening. 100 iron bells clanging, cords rattling violently as if the dead were tearing at their restraints. I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears, screaming, "What do you want from me?" And then silence. Every single bell stopped at once. I looked up, trembling. And I swear to you, I saw them. Dozens of pale hands breaking through the dirt, clawing upward, cords tied to their wrists, bells swaying wildly above, faces, sunken and gasping, pushing through the soil, eyes staring at me with a hunger that no living thing should ever have. I bolted, but as I reached my truck, one final bell rang out. Sharp, clear, cutting through the night like glass shattering. It came from inside my truck. Dangling from the rearview mirror was a small iron bell, cord trailing down into the floorboards. I ripped it off, threw it into the woods and sped away, heart hammering, lungs burning. But it didn't matter, because when I got home, there it was again, hanging from my ceiling fan, then in my bathroom, then inside my closet. No matter where I go, the bell follows. It's been years now, and I've stopped running. I don't bother explaining it to anyone anymore. They'd never believe me. Every night before I sleep, I hear the faint tink, 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 as if the graves are calling me back. And sometimes when I'm very still, I can hear the voices beneath the ringing. And they don't say, "Help," anymore. They say my name. I inherited a house I never wanted. It came from my uncle, who died alone in upstate New York, far away from the rest of our family. I barely knew the man. He was reclusive, strange, the kind of relative you only hear rumors about at Thanksgiving dinners. People whispered that he worked as a gravedigger once, though no one was sure for which cemetery. What everyone agreed on was this: Uncle Walter wasn't right in the head. Still, when the lawyer called and told me he'd left me his property, curiosity got the better of me. I was broke, living paycheck to paycheck, and the idea of owning a house, even a creepy one, was hard to pass up. So, one rainy afternoon, I drove out to see it. The house sat on the edge of a forest, sagging into itself like it had been holding its breath for too long. Paint peeled from the siding, shutters hung by single nails, and weeds grew waist-high in the yard. But it wasn't the house that caught my attention. It was what sat behind it. A graveyard. Small, maybe 20 stones at most, arranged in uneven rows. The earth was sunken in places, as though the ground itself had tired of holding its secrets. Some graves bore names, others had markers so weathered they were just lumps of stone, and near the center was a mausoleum. Small, squat, its stone door sealed with rusted chains. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The house groaned with every gust of wind, and though I'd locked every door, I kept hearing the faintest scrape of metal like something dragging across stone. Around 3 a.m., unable to take it anymore, I wandered into the study. That's when I found it. A journal. It was tucked beneath loose floorboards, leather-bound, brittle with age. The name inside the cover was written in shaky ink. Walter H. Graves. My uncle's journal. I should have stopped there, should have closed it, put it back, never let curiosity win. But of course I didn't. The entries began mundanely, complaints about money, isolation, strange dreams. But after a few pages they shifted. He began writing about the watch. At first I thought it meant he was paranoid about thieves or intruders, but the more I read, the clearer it became. He wasn't watching the graveyard. The graveyard was watching him. One entry chilled me so badly I had to shut the book for the night. They ring again tonight, not bells, never bells, something deeper, something that shakes the marrow in my bones. They want me in the ground, but I can't join them yet. I have to keep watch. If I fall asleep, they'll take me. If I stop digging, they'll rise. The next day, I told myself it was madness. My uncle was insane. Years of isolation had broken him. But when night fell again, and the house seemed to tighten around me, I couldn't resist reading more. He wrote about a pact, about how the graves weren't ordinary, how each stone marked not just a body but a debt. He claimed our family had been tied to this ground for generations, bound by something older than the town itself. And as the last surviving member, it had fallen to him to keep the dead in place. It was laughable, superstition. But then came the scratching. That night, around the same hour, I heard it clearly. claws against wood. Not the house this time. It was coming from outside, from the yard, from the graveyard. I grabbed a flashlight and forced myself out the back door. The beam sliced through the dark, catching only weeds and stones. But then, as I swept it across the row of graves, I saw it, soil shifting. Just slightly, as if something below had pressed against it. I froze, the journal's words slamming back into my head. If I stop digging, they'll rise. I stumbled back inside, slammed the door, and stayed awake until dawn. Over the next week, the noises got worse. Some nights it was scratching, others it was groaning, like the ground itself exhaled. Once I swear I heard whispers seeping through the walls, faint pleading words I couldn't make out. By then I was reading the journal obsessively. My uncle detailed rituals, little tasks he performed to appease the dead. He'd dig shallow trenches around the graves, pour salt, murmur prayers in a language I didn't recognize. And then there were his warnings. Never look into the mausoleum window. Never listen too long when they call your name. And above all, never ever answer. That line gnawed at me. On the 10th night, the whispers came louder, not muffled, not faint, clear. And worse, they were using my name. Daniel. I sat in bed, fists clutching the blanket, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Daniel, saying we're waiting. Every instinct screamed at me not to move, not to respond. But something else, a pull I can't describe, drew me to the window. The graveyard glistened under the moonlight and I saw them, figures pale and half-formed standing by the stones. They swayed, as if the wind carried their bones, and though their faces were shadows, I knew their mouths were open, calling me. I shut the curtain, shaking, repeating to myself, never answer, never answer. But the worst was yet to come. A storm rolled in 2 nights later. Lightning split the sky, rain hammered the roof, and through it all came the ringing. Not bells? No. This was deeper. A sound that seemed to rattle inside my skull, vibrating through my teeth. The journal had mentioned it. When the deep sound comes, the chains won't hold them. I don't remember deciding to go outside. I just remember standing in the mud, flashlight trembling in my grip as the storm howled and the mausoleum door shook against its chains. Something inside was pounding. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Boom. The chains rattled. Boom. The stone door cracked, flakes of mortar breaking loose. I ran to the study, desperate for answers, flipping through the journal. My uncle's final entry stopped me cold. I can't hold them anymore. My blood isn't enough. If you're reading this, it means they'll take you instead. Don't fight it. Don't run. If the keeper falls, another must rise. The pounding grew louder, shaking the walls. I screamed, tearing the journal in half, throwing pages across the room. And that's when I realized the truth. The graves weren't my uncle's job. They were his prison. And by inheriting his house, by stepping foot here, I'd inherited his curse. The chains outside snapped. I heard stone grinding, the mausoleum door shifting open. I don't remember much after that, only flashes. Pale arms reaching from the mud, voices rising in a chorus of my name, the deep sound swallowing everything until I thought my skull would crack. When I woke, it was morning. The storm had passed. The mausoleum door was sealed again, chains intact, as if untouched. The graveyard was silent, but the journal was gone. And now, every night at 3 a.m., I hear the scratching again, louder, closer. I think I know what it means. I'm the keeper now, and one day soon, the chains will break again. I never meant to go back. I promised myself that after the first time, after everything I'd seen, I would stay away from cemeteries at night. But some things are stronger than fear. Curiosity, guilt, the need to see what isn't meant to be seen. It started when I was working as a journalist covering small-town mysteries in Maine. A reader sent me an email with a tip, an abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of a village called Hollow Ridge. They claimed it was haunted, that locals swore the fog never lifted there. and at night you could see lanterns floating between graves, though no one ever carried them. I thought it would make a good story. A simple piece for the Halloween issue, something to draw clicks. I didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't believe in graveward curses. I believed in deadlines. The cemetery was smaller than I expected, tucked behind dense woods, a thin path winding through uneven tombstones. Fog rolled in as soon as I stepped out of my car, thick and cold, clinging to my clothes. The air smelled of wet soil and decay, sharp enough to make my eyes water. I shined my flashlight, sweeping across stones cracked with age, some toppled over, others barely standing. At first, nothing happened. I chuckled to myself, shaking my head at how tense I felt. The fog made the place eerie, yes, but it was nothing supernatural. That's when I noticed it. A lantern, faint and yellow, hovering near the back row. No one was there. No one could be. The graveyard was deserted. I froze. The lantern moved slowly, gliding over the graves, never touching the ground. My instincts told me to leave, to run back to the car. But the journalist in me demanded I see more. I stepped forward, camera ready, flashlight in hand, heart hammering. The lantern stopped, right above a grave. A fresh one. I could see the soil had been disturbed, the mound smooth and wet, though no name marked it. As I raised my camera, I noticed the faint imprint of footprints around it, deep and heavy. They were human, but wrong. Too elongated, too spaced. Then I heard it. A whisper. Soft, almost imperceptible. Don't look away. I froze, stomach knotting. It wasn't coming from the fog or the wind. It was inside my head. And then a chill ran down my spine as I realized the lantern flickered each time my eyes darted away. It demanded attention, demanded acknowledgement. I stepped closer. The fog seemed to thicken, wrapping around me like living fingers. Each breath came like ice, burning my lungs. And then I saw him. A figure emerging from the shadows. Tall, draped in black, his face hidden beneath a hood. But I knew him. I didn't know how, but I did. Every movement, every way he glided over the graves, reminded me of stories I'd read online. The graveward watchers, the keepers, the ones who never slept and never left. I tried to back away, but my feet felt glued to the mud. My flashlight flickered and died. Panic surged. The lantern floated closer, illuminating him fully. And for the first time I saw his face, hollow, sunken, eyes black as obsidian, skin pale, lips twisted into a grin that wasn't human. I wanted to scream, to run, but my voice failed me. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice like gravel sliding down a coffin lid. I'm a journalist," I stammered. I just wanted a story." He tilted his head, slow, deliberate. "Stories are what bind them. Curiosity is what wakes them." The ground began to tremble, soil shifting under the stones. I watched in horror as graves cracked, small hands clawing through dirt, dragging themselves upward. They weren't fully formed, bodies half decayed, eyes empty but staring at me as though pleading or demanding. The lantern floated higher, circling the watcher like a halo of doom. Its light revealed something worse. Every grave had a bell tied to it, cords stretching down to coffins below. And with each ring of the lantern's glow, the bells jingled faintly, though no one touched them. I wanted to run. I wanted to leave the village, the cemetery, the world behind. But the watcher spoke again. "You follow the lights. You answer the call. You belong." And then the twist hit me like a hammer. I looked down at the ground. The mud beneath my boots was shifting, not from the graves, but from me. A bell cord wrapped around my ankle. Slowly, inexorably, it pulled, yanking me toward the nearest mound. The lantern hovered just above it, light illuminating a wooden coffin lid that cracked under unseen pressure. I screamed, thrashing, but the cord held me. My hands clawed at the soil, but the earth was hungry, pulling me closer. I realized in horror, the watcher, the lantern, the fog, the graves, they weren't just haunting me. They were preparing me, preparing a place for me beneath the soil, tying me into the lineage of the keepers. Desperation gave me strength. I yanked my leg free, stumbled back, but the watcher advanced, slow, certain, unstoppable. Each step made the fog swirl around him like water around a stone. The lantern floated beside him, casting its ghostly glow across his face. And then, the final revelation. The grave he hovered over wasn't empty. It bore a name. My name. I froze, heart hammering. The realization crushed me. This cemetery, this fog, this watcher. It had been waiting for me. It had known I would come, had prepared the ground beneath my feet, had tied the cords around me long before I ever set foot here. I wasn't just a witness. I was the next in line. The lantern's glow illuminated the soil. It pulsed as if breathing, waiting to swallow me whole. The watcher whispered again, calm now, patient. You were always meant to find us. Now the grave word continues. I stumbled backward, tripped over the uneven earth and fell hard. The lantern hovered directly above me, casting its light downward, reflecting in my terrified eyes. Shadows stretched across the ground like skeletal fingers. The fog thickened, closing around me until I felt suffocated. And then, everything went black. I woke hours later at the edge of the cemetery, fog lifting, lantern gone. The watcher vanished. Every grave was intact. My heart still raced, my clothes soaked with mud and sweat. My camera was still in my hand, memory cards recording nothing but static and darkness. But I know the truth. The graveyard didn't let me die. Not yet. It sent me back to wander, to tell the story, to lure the next curious soul. And when they come, when they chase the lantern through the fog, the watcher will be waiting. And I'll be watching too. Because now, I belong to the graveward.